Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know, I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. The world sees the U.S. as the biggest threat to humanity. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get right into the content on this Sunday. Salute.
We are all living at a time when profound changes are happening in global politics. The biggest shift is the decline in U.S. global dominance. The 1990s and the 2000s were known as the unipolar moment. The United States was the lone global superpower, and the U.S. had the power to try to impose its will on most countries all across the planet. That ship has long since sailed. And today I'm going to be looking at a study that was conducted by a European organization that is funded by the European Union. They interviewed tens of thousands of people in 84 countries, and they found that global perceptions of the US have massively changed in the past few years. And now a majority of people in countries all around the world see the United States as the greatest threat to the world. And as I'll discuss further in a moment here, a majority of countries prefer China over the US. So this is empirical evidence demonstrating how there is a massive shift happening in global politics. And as the power of the US empire declines, and as it wages war against more and more countries, against Iran and Venezuela, threatening Cuba and other countries, this is leading to a significant shift in global public opinion, and China is becoming more popular while the US is less and less popular. So let's talk about the study that I'm going to be reviewing today. It's called the Democracy Perception Index for the year 2026. This is an annual survey of dozens of countries around the world. And this is done by a Western organization called the Alliance of Democracies. This is led by the former chief of NATO, the US-led Western military alliance, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who was also the prime minister of Denmark. And the Alliance of Democracies discloses on its website that it's funded by Western governments and major corporations, including the European Endowment for Democracy, which is an arm of EU soft power, the European Partnership for Democracy, Freedom House, which is backed by the US government, major US corporations like Microsoft and Palantir, which works very closely with the US military. Even Taiwan funds this organization. So the reason that I mentioned all of that is that I want to emphasize that this report is done by a pro-Western organization backed by Western governments. This is not so-called Chinese propaganda. Because when I look at the results of this survey, people are going to accuse me of supposedly spreading Chinese propaganda, ignoring the fact that this source is backed by Western governments and major US corporations. However, the results of the study speak for themselves. One of the most interesting parts asked 24,000 people in 84 countries, which country do you think poses the greatest threat to the world? And the majority of people in countries all around the world said the United States, including in the US itself, which is very accurate. Americans recognize that the US is the biggest threat to the world. And in pretty much all of North America and Latin America, Eurasia, and most of Africa, people recognize that the US is the greatest threat to the world. People in a few countries in Europe said that Russia is the greatest threat. That's because of the proxy war in Ukraine. And then a few countries in West Asia and North Africa said Israel is the greatest threat. But the majority of respondents in 65 out of the 84 countries that were surveyed said the US is the greatest threat to the world. People in 10 countries said Russia is the biggest threat. In 7 countries, they said Israel. And then there were 2 other countries. The majority of people in Israel said that Iran is the greatest threat. And the majority of people in Japan said that China is the greatest threat. And another very instructive part of this report shows how US military bases are very unpopular all around the world. The US has more than 700 military bases and installations all across the planet. And yet this survey found that those bases are extremely unpopular. So out of the 97 countries that were surveyed on this particular question, only 4 countries had a plurality of people saying that they do support US military bases. Those are Poland, Israel, South Korea, and Puerto Rico. I also appreciate that this report refers to Puerto Rico as a country. Unfortunately, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, of the US empire. And there are many people in Puerto Rico who prefer independence and oppose US colonialism, although there are also people who are culturally and mentally colonized and support the US empire. But anyway, getting back to the survey, the point is that the majority of people in 86 countries say they oppose the US having military bases in their homeland. Similarly, the study gauged the perception of the US in countries around the world, and it found that the vast majority of countries have a negative perception of the US, including pretty much all of Eurasia, most of Europe, many parts of Africa, and North America itself. It's only in a few countries in Latin America where a majority of people have a positive view of the US. And even then, I'm quite skeptical of some of the people, for instance, who were being interviewed in Venezuela. These are probably pro-Western English-speaking Venezuelans. They don't represent working-class Venezuelans in the barrios. But regardless, if you look at the map, the results speak for themselves. The United States is extremely unpopular all around the world. Meanwhile, while US global influence is declining rapidly, and the US is rightfully seen as a threat, and it's unpopular because the US is constantly waging war and threatening foreign countries. At the same time, global public opinion of China is improving. And this same study that, again, was done by a Western organization funded by the EU and led by the former chief of NATO, this survey found that people in a majority of countries on Earth prefer China over the US. If they had to pick either China or the US, 63 out of the 83 surveyed countries say they view China more positively. This includes pretty much all of Eurasia, including, by the way, most of Southeast Asia, as well as West Asia, all of Africa that was surveyed, most of Europe, and most of the Western Hemisphere, including North America and most of Latin America. What's very interesting is to look at the regional perceptions of China versus the US. If you look at, for instance, the Middle East and North Africa, or West Asia and North Africa, you see that China leads over the US by 53 points. China is so much more popular, which of course makes sense because the US is constantly at war in the region. In sub-Saharan Africa, China is 30 percentage points more popular than the US. In Europe, China is 20 percentage points more popular. In the Asia-Pacific region, China is 17 points ahead. And in the Americas, China is 8 points ahead. Now, what's also interesting about this survey is it asked people about specific geopolitical conflicts and wars that are going on. And this survey was conducted in March and April of 2026, by the way. So one of the wars that people were asked about was the US war against Iran. And the survey found that most people in countries around the world prefer Iran. They back Iran against the US. What's striking is in this part of the report, you start seeing the geopolitical divisions between the West and the rest of the world. So in the West, in North America, most of Europe, and some parts of Latin America, a majority of people prefer the US over Iran, although there are exceptions, like Mexico, for instance, prefers Iran. But when you look at Eurasia and Africa, you see that people in a majority of countries are siding with Iran against the US. You see the same trend with Israel-Palestine. The majority of Eurasia and Africa supports Palestine. And even in Europe, increasingly, there is growing support for Palestine, although Ukraine is still very pro-Israel. And then you look at the Western Hemisphere, and it's only the US and a few Latin American countries where a slight majority of people support Israel, although again, it's only a very slight majority, which demonstrates how Israel's global support has completely collapsed. Once again, we see a similar trend in the proxy war in Ukraine. Now, this is an organization that's funded by the European Union, so of course they portray this simply as a war between Russia and Ukraine. In reality, it's a war between Russia and NATO, but regardless, if you look at the map of global public opinion, you can see that a majority of people in Eurasia and Africa side with Russia, whereas the majority of people in Europe, North America, and also surprisingly in much of Latin America side with Ukraine. On the question of Taiwan, you see the exact same results. Now, this is a bit misleading because obviously Ukraine is a country. It's not a territory of Russia, but according to international law, Taiwan is a province of China. The United Nations recognizes the One China principle. Almost all countries on earth recognize the One China principle. Even the US-dominated International Monetary Fund based in Washington, the IMF, refers to Taiwan as a province of China. But regardless, this study asked people if they prefer the Chinese mainland or Taiwan, and you see similar results. In Eurasia, excluding India, South Korea, and Japan, which of course are Western allies, the majority of the other countries in the region prefer the Chinese mainland, and pretty much all of Africa sides with the Chinese mainland, whereas once again, you see the West is united in supporting Taiwan. However, there is one geopolitical issue that pretty much the entire world agrees on, which is Greenland. Donald Trump has vowed to colonize Greenland, which is an autonomous territory of Denmark. And Greenland has a majority indigenous population, and they want to be independent. They certainly do not want to be a US colony. And the majority of people in basically all of the countries surveyed said that they support Greenland against US imperialism. So this is one issue that pretty much unites everyone, including Europe. Europeans are, of course, very angry about this because it's impacting them. So that was the part of the report in which people were asked about geopolitical issues. I want to look at the other part of this survey, which asks people about their views of their home countries. And one of the most interesting parts of this report was the question, is your country heading in the right direction? And you can see that a majority of people in most countries say their country is heading in the wrong direction. That includes most people in Europe, in North America, in Latin America, in parts of Africa, and in much of Southeast Asia and Australia. However, what's interesting is there are a few exceptions. So the country that had the highest rating of people saying their country is heading in the right direction was China. It was more than any other country. What's also interesting is there were only 2 countries in Latin America where people said that their country is heading in the right direction. That was El Salvador and Nicaragua, which is governed by the Sandinista Front, which has a revolutionary government. Other honorable mentions include Vietnam, where a lot of people say they're moving in the right direction. And surprisingly, some people in North Africa, including Algeria. A lot of people in Algeria say that their country is moving in the right direction. And then this brings us to what is perhaps the most controversial part of this report. And this is why earlier I emphasized that this is an organization funded by the European Union, led by the former chief of NATO. They cannot be accused of being pro-China because this report is called the Democracy Perception Index. And the main thing that it studies, in addition to those geopolitical issues, the core of this survey is about perceptions of democracy around the world. And this survey found that the majority of people in most countries say democracy is important, and that includes, by the way, China. However, what's unique about this study is it asks people to define what exactly they mean by democracy. And this is what I like about this report, because the Western perception of democracy, or more specifically, the Anglo-American, the North American understanding of democracy, as liberal capitalist democracy based on individual rights where billionaires can buy elections and big corporations control everything and there's no regulation and no limitations on what rich oligarchs can do. That understanding of democracy is not shared by most people around the world. In fact, what you find is that people in most countries say that they consider democracy to be a government that acts on behalf of the people in order to improve the people's living standards and well-being. That was the most popular response representing the majority of countries on Earth. The second most popular response was that democracy is a form of government that promotes a fair and peaceful society. The third most popular was that democracy is a system of government where people can freely choose their government. And then the least popular understanding of democracy was that it's a system that protects individual rights and freedoms. That liberal capitalist individualist understanding of democracy is the least popular, and yet that's the view that is shared by the United States, Canada, and a few European countries, along with South Korea. But again, that very narrow understanding of democracy is not popular. What you can see from this survey is that a majority of people in countries in Latin America, Africa, and Eurasia say that democracy is about a system of government in which the authorities are dedicated to improving people's living standards and well-being. And then you can see that in China, in some European countries, and in parts of North Africa, people say that democracy is about promoting a fair and peaceful society. So when you have this more nuanced understanding of democracy, you can now see why a majority of people in countries like China say that they do consider their system to be democratic, even though they don't have direct elections held by the people. They have internal elections inside the Communist Party, and pretty much anyone can join the Communist Party. It's a meritocracy, and you have to work up the ranks, and there's democracy inside the party. But obviously, people in China don't go to the voting booth to vote for a billionaire oligarch who will supposedly represent them, when in reality, the US president or the Canadian leader or many European leaders, they're just bankers and multimillionaires and billionaires and corporate oligarchs, and they represent the interests of other wealthy oligarchs and capitalists like them. They don't represent the interests of the people, but that's what they call democracy. Anyway, getting back to this survey, this is why when you have a more nuanced understanding of democracy, you can see why so many people see their system as democratic. And ironically, it's many Western countries where people do not consider their system to be democratic, including in the United States itself, which is supposedly the beacon of democracy, we're told by US propaganda. In fact, people do not consider their system to be democratic and representative. And it makes perfect sense why people feel this way in much of the West, because their systems are not actual democracies, they're oligarchies. And this has been demonstrated empirically, by the way, in peer-reviewed academic studies in leading journals, including a famous study that was published in 2014, well before Donald Trump became president. This is not all about Trump. And this 2014 study showed empirically that the US is not a democracy because people have no influence on policymaking. Policies are designed by large corporations and wealthy oligarchs and big capitalists. Again, the US is not a democracy, it's an oligarchy in which the elections are bought and sold. The watchdog organization in the US, Open Secrets, looks at the influence of money in politics, and it has consistently found over decades that over 80% of the candidates in the Senate and over 90% of the candidates for seats in the House of Representatives who have more funding, more campaign contributions, win the election. So in other words, if you get money from big corporations, from the fossil fuel industry, from the military industrial complex, from Wall Street, from Silicon Valley, you can buy an election. It's quite easy. But if you go against the interests of those large corporations and billionaire oligarchs and big capitalists, you're going to lose the election in the majority of cases. There are a small handful of exceptions, but those exceptions ignore the data, which shows that money buys seats in US Congress. And then if you're even able to get into Congress, you have the lobbyists. Open Secrets found that every single year, lobbyists spend billions of dollars, including in 2025, lobbyists spent $5 billion creating policies in Washington. And there are more than 13,000 lobbyists who are officially registered with the government. And these are the official data. These statistics are the official government statistics. The actual number is probably higher considering the number of people who are not registered lobbyists, but who are still lobbying in Washington and in other capitals. Because lobbying doesn't just happen in Washington, D.C., it happens in every U.S. state. And by the way, for people wondering why the figures for 2026 on this chart are so much lower than in previous years, it's because I'm recording this in May 2026, and the data for the year is not available. But by 2027, you will likely see a continued trend. Every year, lobbyists spend more and more money in Washington creating policy on behalf of large corporations. This Western idea of liberal capitalist democracy being the end of history, that every country is simply going to copy the West, that idea used to be popular in the 90s and 2000s. But increasingly, as we see the nightmare happening in the US politically and economically, with extreme inequality, with a totally corrupt, dysfunctional government waging war all around the world, it's becoming obvious why this idea is very superficial and why people in many other countries have a different view. And this is precisely why the majority of people in most countries on Earth see China more positively than they see the US. They would prefer China over the US. And this is why people in the majority of countries see the United States as the biggest threat to the world. And again, you don't have to believe me. It's not just my opinion. This is what the data very clearly demonstrates. On that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.
Welcome to Geopolitical Trends, where truth matters. Today, I am going to talk to you about something that doesn't make the front page very often, but it absolutely should, in my opinion. I'm going to talk to you about two of the most important waterways on the planet. You guessed it right, the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca. Now, you might be wondering, why should I care about two narrow channels of water on the other side of the world? Here is why. Those clothes you are wearing, the gas in your car, the smartphone in your hand, a huge portion of the global trade that makes modern life possible passes through these two straits. And right now, there is a quiet but very serious struggle happening over who controls them. And here's the interesting thing. At the center of that struggle is China, the world's second largest economy, the world's largest importer of oil, and a nation that has concluded something very alarming. It is dangerously dependent on waterways it does not control. So over the next 15 or 20 minutes, I am going to unpack exactly what China has learned from the ongoing conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran. What Beijing thinks Washington could do to choke China's economy. What plans China has quietly put in place to protect itself. And what all of this tells us about the kind of world we are entering. So let's start with the war that changed everything. Here is the harsh reality. China has been watching the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran with extreme focus. And not just as a distant observer. No. As one of Iran's largest oil customers, Beijing has a direct stake in what happens in the Persian Gulf. Think about it this way. Roughly 40% of China's crude oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. That's almost half of China's energy supply flowing through a single narrow waterway in West Asia. That is now in the middle of a war zone, by the way. And here is what China has concluded from watching this conflict unfold. And this is so important. So stay with me. China's biggest vulnerability is not its military. It's not its technology gap with the West, though it is closing that gap very fast. It's this. China depends heavily on sea lanes, shipping routes that it does not control. And the United States knows it. The ongoing conflict in the Persian Gulf or West Asia has made this crystal clear to the Chinese. When tensions flare between Washington and Tehran, shipping in the Persian Gulf becomes dangerous, like what we are watching. Insurance costs skyrocket. Tankers get seized or attacked. Oil prices spike. And China, sitting thousands of miles away, feels every single one of the shocks because its economy runs to an extent on that oil from Iran. I am sure Chinese military strategists have taken a long, hard look at this situation and come to a sobering conclusion. That is, the United States, whether intentionally or simply as a side effect of its military operations, holds the power to damage China's economy severely just by disrupting freedom of navigation in the Gulf. This is not a theoretical future sort of concern for Beijing anymore. No. This is a live scenario playing out in real time. So what has China done in response? We may ask. It has accelerated on every front, diversifying energy sources, building alternative supply routes, expanding its navy, and yes, deepening relationships with countries along key shipping corridors. The war between the US and Iran, which by the way, it's on behalf of Israel, didn't pull China into the fight, but it absolutely pushed China to prepare as if the next crisis could be aimed directly at them. So the next logical question we had to ask is, could Washington do the same to Malacca as it did to the Strait of Hormuz? Now, this brings us to the question that really keeps Chinese strategists up at night. If the United States can use its military presence in the Persian Gulf to, for example, threaten China's oil supply through the Strait of Hormuz, could Washington do the same thing to the Strait of Malacca? It's a question that many strategists are now pondering. So let's first understand what the Strait of Malacca actually is. It's a narrow channel of water, as you see in the map there, and its narrowest point, only 2.8 kilometers wide. That's it. That runs between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. It sort of connects the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. And here is the staggering number. Nearly 80% of China's oil import passed through the Strait of Malacca. 80%. Let that sink in. Along with the trillions of dollars in broader trade goods every single year. China has a name for this problem. They call it, in English, the Malacca Dilemma. It is known in Chinese as Malujia Qingjin. Hope I pronounce it correctly. And it's exactly what it sounds like. A strategic trap that Washington thinks China is caught in. Now, China's assessment of the United States is direct and unsettling. Washington has shown through its actions in the Gulf that A, it cannot be trusted. B, it has both the ability and the willingness to dominate or disrupt critical maritime choke points when it decides its interests are at stake. And C, to hold on to its global dominance, though you and I know it is slipping away faster and faster. The US Fifth Fleet, which is based in Bahrain, has long acted as the enforcer, if we may use the term, of Persian Gulf navigation. And Beijing's military planners have watched very carefully how the United States uses that presence as a tool of pressure, not just militarily, but diplomatically and economically as well. Logically, it will lead us to ask, could the United States replicate that kind of control at Malacca? The uncomfortable answer from China's perspective is yes, and arguably more easily. Unlike the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Malacca sits right in the heart of America's Asia-Pacific Alliance network. You have Singapore, which borders the Strait of Malacca, hosts a significant U.S. naval logistic presence. America's allies and partners stretch across the entire region. The geographic and political infrastructure to exert pressure on Malacca already exists. This is nothing new. And this is why the Malacca dilemma has gone from being a long-term strategic worry for Beijing to an urgent, immediate priority. The conflict in the Gulf made it real, and China is now in a race to find a way out of the trap. So what exactly has China done to prepare for the possibility of a blockade at Malacca? It's another question we had to ask. And the answer is a lot. Don't be surprised. And it's been going on quietly for 2 decades. That's how long China's been working on this. Beijing has not put all its eggs in one basket. Instead, it has built what you might call a web of redundancies, multiple backup systems designed to ensure that no single choke point, no matter how powerful the nation enforcing it, can bring the Chinese economy to its knees. And it will never happen, if I may add. This leads me to walk you through the main pieces of this plan. So I'm going to divide it into four key points, 4 or 5. 1, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, known as CPEC. The centerpiece of China's escape route from Malacca is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, known as CPEC. This is a massive infrastructure project that includes roads, railways, pipelines that run through Pakistan and connects Western China all the way to the Arabian Sea. And at the end of that corridor, you know what it is? Is Gwadar Port, a deep water port that China has invested billions into developing on Pakistan's coastline. Because it was an objective for that. And the idea was, and is, straightforward. Oil tankers from the Middle East or West Asia offload their cargo at Gwadar, and that energy travels over land through Pakistan directly into China, completely bypassing the Straits of Malacca. If this route becomes fully operational, as it is expected, as an energy terminal, of course, it fundamentally changes China's vulnerability. The Malacca trap loses much of its power to the chagrin of Washington. 2, the Myanmar-China pipelines. China has also built an oil and gas pipeline that runs from the Bay of Bengal on the Myanmar western coast all the way into China Yunnan province. Once again, the logic is simple. Energy comes in from the Indian Ocean side, travels overland, and reaches China without ever going near Malacca Strait. This, in my opinion, is another Malacca sort of free lifeline that China now has access to. Number 3, the string of pearls. Those are naval footprints across the Indian Ocean. Beyond the infrastructure, China has dramatically expanded its naval and strategic presence across the Indian Ocean region. A strategy, in my opinion, that critics have called it the string of pearls. And this refers to a network of port access agreements, logistic facilities, and diplomatic relationships that China has built with countries all along the key shipping corridors between West Asia and China. Because that will include Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Pakistan, and further west. Further west, you have China's first overseas military base in Djibouti, right at the entrance to the Red Sea. And I had a chance to be at that port at one point in my career. This isn't just about trade. It's about giving China the ability to project naval power far from its own shores and to have a friendly port to operate from across an enormous stretch of ocean. 4, diplomacy with Malacca's neighbors. China has also been deeply strategic in its diplomacy with the 3 countries that borders the Strait of Malacca itself. There are 3 countries that we're talking about here: Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. Beijing understands something very fundamental and important. For the United States to blockade Malacca, it will need the cooperation, or at least the acquiescence, of these sovereign nations. So China has worked steadily to ensure those countries have strong economic and diplomatic ties with Beijing, making it politically much more complicated for Washington to use Malacca as a weapon, the same way they're doing right now in the Persian Gulf. So when you take all this together, China's plan is not a single silver bullet. No, it's not. It is a layered, multi-decade strategy designed to reduce vulnerability from every angle through infrastructure, naval power, and diplomacy. The objective is simple: make sure that if someone tries to close the trap has already been dismantled. That is China's vision and strategy. And here in the bigger picture that I want you to understand, it's the end of the unipolar world. So let's ask the question that really matters. And the question is, what does all of this tells us about the world we are living in? It's a question worth asking and worth digging into. What we can conclude is this: the transition from a unipolar world where one country, the United States, called the shots, to a multipolar world where multiple major powers compete for influence is no longer a prediction. It is happening right now as we speak, in real time. And the Straits of Malacca and Hormuz are 2 of the places where you can see it most clearly, that shift from a unipolar to a multipolar. Think about what the unipolar world looked like. For roughly 3 decades after the Cold War ended, The United States was the undisputed guardian of the global trade. American naval power protected shipping lanes. American-dominated financial institutions set the rules. And if you wanted to participate in the global economy, you largely played by the United States rules. That's at least what it was. Here's the harsh reality. China's entire strategic response to its Malacca and Hormuz vulnerabilities is, at its core, a rejection of that arrangement. Because Beijing is saying, we are not going to accept a system where another country can threaten our economy by controlling the water we depend on. And rightly so. And by the way, China is not alone in this thinking. No, you have countries like Russia, Iran, Brazil, and even India, though New Delhi doesn't matter much. A growing number of nations in what we call the global south are now actively building alternatives to Western-dominated systems. That includes from new payment networks that bypass the US dollar to regional security arrangements that deliberately leave Washington out. Think about the BRICS grouping, for example. Originally just started with Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, and India. Has now expanded significantly and is now seriously discussing everything from alternative reserve currencies to parallel trade settlement systems. Though it is my belief some members of the bloc are undermining its progress as we speak. I'll let you guess who that country or countries are. What is emerging is not a clean, stable new world order. No. It is messy, it is competitive, and deeply unpredictable. Because the old enforcer, the United States, still has enormous power, by the way. It does. It still has the world's most capable military, in theory. It still controls the global reserve currency, though it is declining. But that doesn't change overnight, by the way. Here is what has changed. The United States can no longer dictate terms and challenge. And every major power in the world, we're talking about countries that matter, are now hedging. They are hedging, they are building backup systems, alternative alliances, and independent infrastructure, precisely because they have watched what happens when Washington decides to use its leverage unjustly and abusively. That's the harsh reality. So when you bring in the Strait of Malacca and the Strait of Hormuz into the conversation, they have become now the perfect metaphors for this entire global shift. They are narrow ribbons of water, but whoever controls them, whoever can survive without them, holds enormous power over the modern world. The fierce scramble to either hold that leverage or escape it is what defining the geopolitics of the 21st century. As I argue in my upcoming book, The Dynamics of China's Geopolitics, Remaking the Global Order, the People's Republic of China, PRC, has created a distinctive model of development and governance. State capitalism combined with Communist Party political control and accountability, rapid economic growth coupled with crackdown on corruption, and selective participation in the international system. Why is this important? Because at the same time preserving strategic autonomy. Whether this model is unique to China or represents an alternative development pathway to other countries from around the world that might follow, it remains debated as of now. And it ought to be. Here is my conclusion. What I've covered so far, a lot of ground today. And we've seen how China has drawn hard lessons from the US-Iran conflict, lessons about its own vulnerability and the urgent need to reduce that vulnerability. What we've seen so far, if we have seen how Beijing, for example, assesses the threat that Washington could, in theory, replicate at Malacca, because what it has effectively done at Hormuz, and why that assessment has driven China to act with remarkable speed and scale. We've walked through China's actual plans, the pipelines through Pakistan and Myanmar, the string of pearls across the Indian Ocean, the diplomatic cultivation of Malacca's neighbors, a whole architecture of contingency built over decades. And we've placed all of this, I placed it for you in its proper context. And what is that context? A world in transition, where the old rules are being challenged and discarded, and where the nations that adapt faster to the new reality will shape what comes next. That is the good point to understand. So the choke points are narrow, Strait of Hormuz and Strait of Malacca, but the stakes could not be wider. Thank you for watching. And if this gives you something to think about, I would like you to share it.
Venezuela. So you and many others have presented this group as, they're part of the same sort of camp. There's this new rising global order, sort of, or an anti-imperialist camp. But these countries, when you really look at them, besides being anti-imperialist, besides being anti-America in that anti-imperialism sense, these countries have wildly different systems. I mean, these countries really don't have much in common. When you actually look at them individually, they have different religions, different languages, different economic systems even. You could say China is more of a state capitalist country, right? I wouldn't call them communists at all. I think they have capitalism. It's just state capitalism. Iran is still very much an Islamic republic. Russia's nationalist, I would say. North Korea, hereditary socialist. It's kind of hard to know exactly what North Korea is. Venezuela is something different. They're all so different. First of all, do you think they're really the good guys? A lot of people will kind of idealize these groups and they'll say, well, anything anti-imperialist, anything anti-West, they almost say these are the good guys, like China's the good guy or Russia's the good guy, or, these are the good guys. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think they're the good guys. I don't think we're the good guys. I think power corrupts absolutely. So I think just depends on which thumb you want to be under. Choose a thumb, this thumb or that thumb. But what are your thoughts on that? Why would you say that? Do you think they're a group that's rising, that's going to benefit the world in some way? And if so, why?
There is a fundamental difference between these countries that are rising and have broken out of Western domination and the West, and that is that they believe in economic growth. And they all have what they all have in common. It's interesting, different ideologies, different histories, but they all have an economy that is centered around a state that came out of kind of an anti-colonial revolution, right? That they had kind of an anti-colonial revolution, and that anti-colonial revolution led to the creation of kind of a powerful state. And that state draws its power from a very well-organized population. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. These countries don't have the level of free speech that we have in the West, and they don't have the level of freedom of religion, freedom of assembly that we have, and that's not good. But at the same time, you could argue, and I have seen with my own eyes, that these countries are more democratic in the literal sense of the word than the West is, because democracy means the rule of the people. And like if you go to Iran or you go to Venezuela, those governments wouldn't be in power for 2 seconds if it wasn't for a very, very well organized population of people who wake up every day and say, it is my job to carry out the will of the Islamic Revolution in my neighborhood. And, they're part of a Basij council, and they're patrolling the streets to make sure women have a headscarf on, and they're meeting with their neighbors and talking about what the supreme leader just said in his latest proclamation. They are heavily involved in the governing process in Iran. And Iran relies on these kind of community organizations of people that carry out the will. And the same in Venezuela, right? In Venezuela, those Bolivarian circles, they are the essence of the government of Venezuela. In addition to the regular military, they have Bolivarian militias where people wake up in the morning and they're going out in the streets and practicing how to run up and down the streets with their guns and, shooting together and learning everything. And there are people who wake up in Venezuela every day and say, how can I carry out the goals of the Bolivarian Revolution in my community, in my neighborhood? And these states rely on that. And even Russia to some degree. It's not what it was during the time of the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union is never coming back. It had its problems. But China, every apartment building has Communist Party members that are actively, trying to, keep track of making sure everyone in the apartment building is following the Communist Party's agenda. The people are very, very, very heavily involved in the governing process. And in the West, it's the opposite. In fact, people are not involved in government at all. Government is just kind of, in many ways, it's just doing whatever it wants. And we're just kind of, standing back and objecting more and more loudly and voting for it to be different and not getting what we want. So that's important to keep in mind. And when it comes to the issue of human rights, we have to remember that human rights is related to development. Nobody anywhere in the world was talking about freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and the right of conscience and et cetera, human rights of man. No one was talking that way until like the 1400s in Europe. And were people just evil until then? We were all just big, mean people who didn't believe in freedom until John Locke was born? Of course not. It was based on a level of economic development. You couldn't try running a feudal society in the year 1000 in medieval Europe. Try running that on the basis of everyone can say whatever they want and believe whatever they want. It wouldn't work, right? That the level of development necessitated a level of authoritarianism. But it was with a new level of development and the rise of the mercantile classes, and it was on the basis of that we got the idea of having an elected government and having property owners get to vote and having people being able to choose their own religions. Freedom comes with development. And every Western country, including America, has in its constitution stipulations where a state of emergency can be declared and we lose our rights, right? If the Congress declares war, you can forget about free speech in America. You can forget about freedom of association. You can even forget about property rights. The military can come to any factory and say, all right, you're going to do what we say as part of the war effort. And it's understood that that's necessary because you're in a state of war. And that these countries that are rising up, they're rising up from a level of underdevelopment, and they're building themselves up. And in a lot of ways, they are fighting for their lives. You could argue, China, the way that they've dealt with the Uyghur terrorists and Tibet separatists, et cetera, they're kind of battling every day to lift themselves up. They are, to some degree or other, at war. And I think they would all like to have more freedom of association and more human rights. They would like to have it, but the conditions they're in don't necessarily allow for it. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And when we, in the Western ideology, we kind of moralize it. Good countries have freedom and bad countries don't. Well, freedom is based on conditions, and we forget that in Western rhetoric a lot.
I would argue, though, that China and Russia are way beyond that point. I don't think those countries are suffering. I don't think if you go to those countries, you're going to see a bunch of poor people or struggling. In fact, the opposite, especially with China, the exact opposite. Yeah. It's like obviously way more developed than even the United States at this point. So, and Russia's booming, doing really well. People are living great lives in Russia at this point. So I think they're way beyond that. And then I understand not every society values freedoms in the same way that Western society values freedoms. So I think Asian societies, and this could change in the future, but I think a lot of them are like, no, we feel free enough. It's very interesting when talking to people who live over there. My family still lives over there in Vietnam, for example. And they recognize that they don't have the same level of freedom of speech. They know this. They're not stupid. They know they can't say everything. My family will even limit conversations with me online about certain topics. They'll say, we won't talk about that anymore right now, but they don't also seem to really yearn for it either. I mean, it's kind of an interesting, like, they don't seem to miss it, but maybe it's because they haven't had it, or maybe they just don't care. They're focusing on other things. And so or maybe they don't have as many political problems as we do. And so they don't feel the need to speak up and assemble and have to go up against your government because they don't feel like their government is as corrupt, maybe, for example. I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but there's certainly maybe a mental shift that's a little bit different. But I would say that China and Russia are way beyond the point of survival. I mean, China's, it could be argued they're already the global leader. That could be argued.
What's interesting is that with these countries, there's a little bit more honesty. Liberalism and the open society and the West, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, total freedom of speech, total freedom of association, total freedom of religion. It's never been that way. It's always been kind of like a dog chasing its tail. You go back to the founding fathers, they were talking about, all men are created equal while they had slaves, and, that no one was even thinking about giving women the right to vote. And you can go all the way up to today, where, the Uhuru movement is dragged into federal court for advocating being friendly with Russia, where Guantanamo Bay is full of people who are being held without charges, even though the Constitution very clearly says that, habeas corpus, you have the right to face charges. You can't just be held indefinitely. The drone strike program, right? The president can just sign off that you deserve to die. No trial, nothing. He just says, oh, that guy's a terrorist, put him on the drone list, kill him. That's certainly not Western liberalism. And Western liberalism has never been sincere, but it always claims to be. It always extols these lofty values of total freedom, total human rights, while doing the opposite. Whereas in a lot of these countries, there's a little bit more honesty about it. I'll never forget a conversation I had when I was in Iran, where I sat down with an Iranian cleric, and he said, Caleb, we are not a total democracy here in Iran. We are not. We have voting, and we have different political parties and candidates, but we have this thing called the Guardian Council. And before any candidate can run, the Guardian Council has to look into them and make sure that they're a good Muslim and they're in line with our Islamic revolutionary ideology. And if so, we approve them. And if not, they're not allowed to run. And that's not pure democracy. But you have the same thing in America. It's called Wall Street. It's called big money and big corporations. And they look into all the candidates and make sure that they're in line with what they want and all of that. And who is it better? If your democracy is going to be guided by certain people, is it better it be guided by whoever just happens to have the most money, or by the people who led the revolution, toppled the US-backed dictator, oversaw the electrification of the country and poverty alleviation, and are considered the most important religious scholars in the country? Who is better? And I thought that's a really good point. And ultimately, I would like to see a totally democratic society. I would like to see a society of total freedom. And in fact, I'd like to see a world free from any coercion, right? Imagine a world where we could all just kind of do what we feel like doing and there'd be enough abundance for everybody. But the road to that is eliminating scarcity. And I think, honestly, that kind of world is not that far off because of artificial intelligence. I mean, with computers now, we should be living in the most abundant society that has ever existed because computers can do almost anything. But yet we have an irrational economic system where self-driving cars would lead to millions and millions of truck drivers out of work and all the traffic courts shutting down and all the Uber drivers and state highway patrolmen losing their jobs and poverty and riots in the streets. That doesn't make sense. We should have an economy where technological advancement leads to abundance for all. And I think when you have a state that is well rooted among the population that is organizing the economy, you're not going to have these kinds of issues. You can have the state say, okay, we're going to control the natural resources. We're going to allow and promote and fund and invest in business to flourish, but we're going to control the economy. And you can have a situation where technological advancement and the abundance it creates doesn't lead to poverty. Whereas in the West, profits are in command and your only value is your ability to rent yourself out to a boss. And now we have a situation where technological advancement is creating poverty. And that's the big issue that underlies all of this. And I think that's why the elite are getting desperate in their Malthusian schemes, is because they see they just don't need us anymore like they once did. Right. And they're desperate to drive down the population, drive down consumption to stabilize the economy.
So you're kind of saying that you don't think there is like a good or a bad, you just think it's different. It sounds like what you're saying here. Like if the world starts being run by China, for example, rather than the United States, you think that do you think that if China was now the global dominant, flexing their muscle the way that the United States does, however China chooses to do that. I mean, the United States does it through bombs and drones and a lot of bullying. China maybe would do it in an entirely different way. Do you think that they would do it in a different way? Or do you think that they would become militarily aggressive? Do you think that they would, because like I said, I think power corrupts absolutely. I think no matter who gains the power, unfortunately, I mean, maybe you get lucky once in a blue moon and you end up with a benevolent leader. But for the most part, I think power corrupts absolutely. So if you end up with China in charge, what does the world look like? Do you think it's better than what the United States is doing?
Well, I don't want China to be in charge, and I don't think China wants to be in charge. I want America and China and Russia and all the countries of the world to share power. And I want a multipolar world where we don't buy into the idea that the world has to be centered around Wall Street and London. And I would like to see a world where America and China can trade with each other to mutual benefit, and we get wealthier as China gets wealthier. And it's not a competition, but it's a shared gain for all humanity. And I think that when I listen to the words of President Xi Jinping, that's what he wants as well. I don't think it is China's aspiration to dominate the world or to export their system. They call it socialism with Chinese characteristics, and they have never exported their system. I know in the 1970s in America, there were various communist groups that espoused the Chinese line. And in the 1980s, the Chinese government basically told all those groups, we don't want to work with you anymore. We're not interested in exporting our system. They said class struggle outside of our own borders is of no interest to us. And that China's main way of, kind of sharing power or connecting with countries around the world has been building infrastructure, right? It's been investing in countries and building up the infrastructure, the roads, the highways, the airports that enable a country's economy to flourish. And then there's more of an economy in that country. More people start businesses, more people are able to get good paying jobs, and China's already there investing. And so China gets wealthier and the country gets wealthier, and it's win-win cooperation. And I think that's what China, at least at this time, seems to be aspiring for. But I don't want the world to be run by China. I want the world to be run by the people of the countries they live in. I want people to have sovereignty, and I want prosperity. And I don't want the world to be a zero-sum game. And I really don't buy into the idea that growth must stop so that Wall Street and London can stay at the top and control the oil markets until the end of time. I believe that humanity is growing and expanding more rapidly than ever before. And technological advancement lays the basis for a world of abundance and freedom from coercion, and that we should celebrate humanity's unique creative ability.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you right now that I don't think China has the ambition to run the world. I don't think that's what they're thinking. But I'll tell you, the Chinese people are different. Xi Jinping might have that viewpoint right now of, look, we're just trying to build. And you can understand their perspective because it's like what you've been saying, which is it's about economic prosperity, needing to grow. And Xi Jinping has been just hyper focused on, we need to turn this country around, right? We need to build, we need to grow, we need to have economic prosperity. But once you get to that point of economic prosperity, I guess this is what I mean by power corrupts absolutely, is that once a country gets to that point, now they're high and mighty and they're no longer needing to worry about things like economic development or survival, then that's when things shift. And the Chinese people historically, they're very proud people. And they, and cocky sometimes, just outright cocky about how great they've been in the past, especially towards the rest of us Asians. And we can, our countries, my country, I'm obviously American, but my mother's country is Vietnam. We have a very different perspective about how sometimes the Chinese can treat others that are around them when they're dominant. And it's not pleasant, unfortunately. And that's why I say, yes, even though right now they might have a viewpoint of, look, we're just trying to economically develop. But once they gain power, history does repeat itself. And historically, there have been, in Asia, a ton of wars, a lot of conquering, a lot of, it's like whenever any group gets a lot of power, they start kind of exerting that power, and unfortunately in really brutal ways at times. Or, the Chinese have a tendency to say things like, we developed it, we gave it to you. It's because of us, you have this thing, to the rest of the Asian countries. It's not very nice, but it shows a mentality of, maybe when Xi's gone and there's a lot of prosperity, another group comes in and says, well, if it weren't for us, you'd be nothing. And that unfortunately sounds a lot like America, right? That sounds a lot like the US mentality toward the rest of the world right now, which is, well, if it weren't for us, you'd be broke, poor, and barely surviving. And so you got to do what the West says or else. And I guess that's my fear with a rising. Not that I don't want these countries to rise. I just think that we have to be aware that, swapping it out for another country doesn't mean something's going to be better. And I think a lot of people have these kind of rose-colored glasses where they think, oh, well, once the world's ruled by China and Russia, we're all going to be, it's going to be rainbows and butterflies. And I would say, I would maybe think twice about that. I don't think it would be. I think we're just swapping out. Horror for more horror because leaders tend to terrorize us a little bit or a lot. But,
well,
how do we prevent that, I guess?
There's a rising interest in geopolitics in Eurasia, in Russia and China and other parts of the world. And that is the study of how relationships to geography, land masses affect political systems and developments. And if you look at the past 5,000 years, there have been different types of empires that have arisen. The Roman Empire, for example, on the Italian peninsula, it was a sea-based empire, and they said all roads lead to Rome. They controlled the roads, they controlled the sea routes, and they extracted tribute, and it all concentrated into one mighty city of Rome. And the British Empire was very much like the Roman Empire. It was a sea-based empire. And then I think Alfred Mahan wrote the first book of geopolitics, the role of sea power in history. It was about how if you had a mighty navy, you could control the world. And the Western empires that have existed right up to America have been based on this notion of we'll control the ocean, we'll control the trade routes, we'll have a mighty navy that will control the trade routes, and everyone will have to do business through us. We're the global middleman. And we can then concentrate wealth in mighty cities that are like the center of this military and trade sea-based empire. And that's one model of an empire. And you call that Atlanticism. That model in global trade is a model that basically leads to preventing development because you're just controlling the trade routes. Whereas if you look at the empires that have developed on land masses, you look at the Chinese dynasties that developed over the course of thousands of years, you look at the Russian Empire, in order to have a great landmass be controlled on the land, you have to build roads to connect the different regions to each other. You have to bring development. And the reason China was able to have like the first civil service examination, for example, the reason that China invented paper money, it was because in order to hold all that territory together, you had to engage in a kind of development. You couldn't just have a mighty army to control the trade routes. And that empires that develop on the Eurasian world island and on the land masses have a different character. And that's why the East is more collectivist in just the culture is just more collectivist, because these are civilizations and empires that developed on the land versus the kind of empires that developed on the ocean in Western Europe. And I think there's a lot to that. And that has a lot to say. And that also right before China endured the century of great humiliation, they had kind of pivoted into being sea-based, right? That's why there are so many ethnically Chinese people throughout the Pacific, is China had kind of tried to pivot into being almost like the British Empire, and they were contending with Japan, and that's when they had the century of humiliation, the Opium Wars, they almost lost everything. But now China has reasserted itself largely as being a land-based civilization, and that you could argue that what started with Dr. Sun Yat-sen and then continued with Mao Zedong up through Deng Xiaoping, right up to Xi Jinping, is China very much being focused on the landmass. And, this kind of stuff is important. This is why the Taiwan issue is so important to China, right? When China was kept poor during the century of humiliation, it was because they were divided. And that, that they didn't even have a strong central government. In the 1920s, they had a famine. And, there were people in regions that had lots of food, and there were other people in regions that were starving, and they didn't have a central government that could carry out relief. And the Chinese Communist Party, that is one of their big, achievements, is they've created one China. So when there are forces that want to break Taiwan away and say Taiwan is not part of China, it's a completely separate country, that is a threat to what China has achieved as with one China. But during World War II, one of the great movies that came out during World War II, Sergei Eisenstein made a movie about a czar, Ivan the Terrible. You watch that movie, it's all about how this czar, Ivan the Terrible, was strong enough to bring the peoples of the Russian Empire together to repel foreign invaders and develop and advance civilization. And that the idea of having these great land masses together on the Eurasian world island is a source of their strength. And that's why Brzezinski, he also, this is a U.S. foreign policy strategist, Columbia University, the guy that Obama, studied under. Brzezinski wrote about the grand chessboard, and the strategy is keep the barbarians killing each other to maintain control over Eurasia, and play up every ethnic and tribal and religious difference, and keep Eurasia divided. And that's how the West can maintain their power. It's very interesting.
Thanks for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson Show, which you can catch Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, for free.
About 3 hours ago, the Iranian parliament said, oh, how about this? We will pass a bill to finalize our decision to legally enforce management over the Strait of Hormuz. So with the bill set to be voted on, approved, and then turned into law. So Iran is saying, yeah, whatever you said yesterday, here's what we're doing. And of course, there's issues with the country of Oman. We'll get to that in a little bit as well. But then one of the other things was that for the Iranian side, they were absolutely adamant that there was a number of things. We've told you what Professor Morandi said, which echoes what the senior leaders of Iran have publicly said, that there are several non-negotiables. And we showed you with Nima Al-Horshid yesterday, who was emphatic of saying that maybe the most important of all the non-negotiables is the war against Hezbollah in Lebanon by Israel. Now, we've been talking about that. That's kind of the marker. Who's going to be able to control whom? Will President Trump control Netanyahu, or will Netanyahu control Trump? And this is the headline just moments before we came on the air here. IDF expands South Lebanon operations. So whatever may have been going on behind the scenes, whatever President Trump is trying to tell anyone, here's the facts. Here's the evidence. This is what matters the most. What is the truth on the ground? Forget about what anybody's saying. I did a show yesterday where I showed you President Trump has said a whole slew of things, all kinds of claims and demonstrations and demands and everything else. None of it has come to pass. So the question is going to be, where are we going to go now? And even before we figure out where we're going to go now, let's find out what did happen yesterday. And I'd like to bring on Mr. Barnes here. We're very grateful to have him on. He is a constitutional lawyer, very politically astute, which is why we're very grateful to have him. Also, very well connected to D.C., even though he resides in Tennessee. You can find him on X and on his show with Viva Fry at Viva Barnes at law.locals.com. Robert, I'm really grateful to have you on today, especially on a Saturday. Really appreciate that. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's been an interesting period of time, no doubt about that.
Well, it really has. And you know, I know you got to protect sources and stuff, and I know you can't say everything that you know, but hopefully you can give us a little bit of insight, because when Trump was so confident yesterday, I'm going to make a final decision on this, and he goes into this into this meeting here in the White House in the Situation Room, then comes out, everybody says there's no answer. He doesn't put anything else on Truth Social that I saw as of just a few minutes ago. Fox News doesn't say anything. Newsmax doesn't say anything. Even Axios is kind of quiet. What gives? What happened at that meeting, and why did we not get a decision?
I mean, basically, the same deal has been on the table for the president now for more than a month, going back to early April. The original ceasefire agreement was a ceasefire everywhere, including in Lebanon, and in terms of Israel, and no blockade. And if there was no blockade and a ceasefire in Lebanon, then the Straits of Hormuz are open. for traffic, some sort of environmental fee, whatever the toll is called, some sort of fee is going to get paid. But back then that was the agreement. Didn't require release of funds, didn't require sanctions relief. It only required that there be no blockade and that there be no Israeli war in southern Lebanon. The Israel breached it right away. Israel refused to pull back. Finally, the Trump managed to assert himself a little bit as to Israel, and Israel decided to have a kind of a ceasefire, whatever an Israeli ceasefire is. And then the Vice President Vance, who's been lead on negotiations on this for quite some time, managed to persuade the president to allow the strait to be open by fully confirming that. And instead, Trump confabulated into existence a deal that didn't exist, and decided to keep the blockade. And from that moment forward, the strait's been closed. And so the same, what Iran has been doing all the way through is, as soon as the U.S. breaches its agreement, Iran demands more. They know they have to impose a price on Trump refusing to honor his own agreements. And so now they require release of funds. And Iran is only going to act if action takes. They don't care whether Trump signs whatever he signs. They have no interest in that whatsoever. They only care about action. That was when they see ships out of the blockade, when they see various U.S. The military buildup go back to what it was before the summer of 2025. That's the level they're demanding. And until they receive funds released that are being frozen by the U.S. directly or indirectly, excuse me, and until I got a little bit of your cough, you
got a virus through the computer.
Yeah, exactly. And until they see Israel out of southern Lebanon, they are not opening up the strait. And this has been made clear again and again and again. And so, because of Trump's screw-ups, it has required Iran to escalate their demands. The Vice President Vance will get Trump to agree to those demands, and then he'll change his mind sometimes within the day, sometimes between days, sometimes within minutes. Trump cannot stick to any agreement he himself reaches because of his diminished decision-making process and his frontal lobe behavioral dementia, which they don't test for, by the way, in these tests that are coming out. These tests are not being done by the president. Instead, they're pretending that he has the greatest health ever, that his bruise is because he shakes so many hands and stuff like this. It's kind of pitiful what's happened at the physician's office there. But basically, we had another deal, and Trump failed to follow through on it again, because as soon as he hears criticism from the Israel lobby, as soon as he hears criticism from the Fox News crowd, he immediately retreats. As soon as he hears the word comparison to Obama, he panics. Runs into a corner and says, no, we're going to demand something totally different. And now Iran will agree to this, knowing Iran will not agree to it. So the reality is, until we remove our military operations to a level that it was prior to summer of 2025, so we end the blockade, until Israel gets out of Lebanon, and until at least $12 billion shows up in Iranian bank accounts from U.S. frozen funds, then the strait will stay closed, and the global economy will get closer and closer and closer to the cliff.
That is such an important and just stunning reality of chronology that you just put out there. I think it was April 8th, when we had an agreement, and Abbas Araghchi and Trump themselves were apparently both planned on making simultaneous statements on their social media platforms that the Straits was open and that everybody was going to open up so we could have negotiations. And as you point out, at that time, there was nothing about $24 billion. There was nothing about, at least not that much sanctions relief. They were going to get it open, then we'll talk. And then when Trump posted his, he says, but our blockade is going to remain closed. And then, of course, within hours, they resubmitted and nothing ever got opened at all. And the deal we could have had then was so much better than anything even on the table right now, because Iran is, as you just saw, or people just saw with this post here I just made a second ago from last night, from this morning, that the Iranian parliament has said, look, now we're just going to codify it. We have it. So that's not even, apparently no longer even on the table. And we have issues with Oman, et cetera. Now then, where are we going to go here? So I'm going to get your reaction to a couple of things that have happened since that meeting happened. But what is your understanding of where things go next? What's happening behind the scenes?
So Vice President Vance keeps trying to get the best deal that can be got, and Trump keeps blowing it up and rug pulling it. I'm increasingly calling the Trump second term the rug pull presidency. Started with his meme coins and has continued through the Iran war, the Epstein files, supported people like Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene. But as last time I was on, I mentioned that if Massie won, we would get out. But if Massie, if they were able to take Massie out, it would motivate Trump to stay in. And unfortunately, that's what's happened. He's misread the results of those elections, and that boomer conservatives that watch Fox News can dominate a Republican primary in rural Kentucky, but they're not going to dominate the Senate and gubernatorial and House elections in the fall. But Trump loves to confabulate these days. His good decision-making days are gone. And the effect of it is the entire White House walks around on eggshells, tries to beg him to do a deal. He'll agree to a deal, then walk it back within minutes and moments. This is why Iran now will not rely on anything he says on truth, rely on anything he signs, rely on anything he relays through the mediators in Pakistan and in Oman and in China, who are all having a role along with Russia in these negotiations. And the reality is, if the Saudis and the Qataris want to protect themselves, they can't rely on a diminished decision-making, ego-incapacitated president. I mean, in the way some people that were connected to the meetings yesterday described it was Trump no like toy, Trump throw toy, Trump scream until he get new toy. I mean, it's basically a 2-year-old toddler's mindset. It's my grandson's mindset. That's sadly where the president is. So they can't get him to take action. And now Iran will now rely solely on action. They don't care what he says. They don't care what he signs. He's betrayed all trust and confidence in that regard. They're on constant guard for attack. That now what the U.S. has been told is that they have to see the ships gone from the blockade. They have to see a beginning of our exit of our military presence in the Gulf back to at least a summer of 2025 level. They need to see money in their bank accounts, and they need to see Israel out of southern Lebanon. Until they see all four, the strait stays closed. And it's smart on their part. If the Saudis and Qataris are serious, they need. I know there's been behind the scenes discussion from the Saudis and the Qataris, particularly the Qataris, that they may shut down U.S. military bases in the region within the next year. They need to escalate that. That needs to go public. There needs to be, frankly, constant, continuous humiliation of Trump into some reasonable position. Otherwise, he'll take the whole world's economy off a cliff and the Republican Party with him.
Yeah, that's I don't know that reality is hit yet, because too many people still think, and I'm talking Republicans, especially office holders or office wannabe holders, they still are afraid to cross Trump because he's still, at least the belief is, he still has electoral power, as he apparently showed in the Thomas Massie situation here. I know there's caveats to that, which you just mentioned, but the impression is still everybody's afraid to try and cross that. So I don't think there's going to be much help there. But you know what, Robert, I want to take a look at what might happen next with the internal headwinds here in Washington that are pulling Trump in different directions. But I want to really kind of put it in context of, I want to show, we just talked about how far April 8th is from what we can probably get now. Let me show you where we were at the beginning, where first there's Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff were laying out the justification for the war, and they also laid out the objectives for the war. Watch this.
They manufacture. There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was the unauthorized Marco Rubio admitting that the imminent threat was actually Israeli attack into Iran. Sorry. Here is the actual claims, claimed picked up later by both Rubio and Witkoff.
They manufacture their own centrifuges to enrich this material. So there's almost no stopping them. They have an endless supply of it. The 60% material, Sean, can be brought to 90%. That's weapons grade.
in roughly 1 week, maybe 10 days at the outside.
Let me explain to you guys this in simple English. Okay, Iran is run by lunatics, religious fanatic lunatics. They have an ambition to have nuclear weapons. They intend to develop those nuclear weapons behind a program of missiles and drones and terrorism that the world will not be able to touch them for fear of those things. And this is the weakest they've ever been. Now is the time to go after them. The president made the decision to go after them, take away their missiles, take away their navy, take away their drones, take away their ability to make those things so that they can never have a nuclear weapon.
So we were going to say that they can't have any missiles, they can't have a navy, they can't have drones, they can't have manufacturing, and they can't have any nuclear weapon stuff. That's what we set out. That was March the 2nd. And this was all claimed, as Witkoff there said, and he said this on Sean Hannity, especially before the war even started. He said, my God, they could be a week to 10 days away from a nuclear bomb. We had to go in there. That's what we had at the time. Do you think we'll even see a shadow of any of that at the end?
No, not at all. In fact, I mean, it was always a bit of a fiction. Like all of his factual claims are just false and have been belied by our own intelligence. Even though Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, has now been pushed out. Amaryllis Fox, who was her deputy, daughter-in-law to Robert Kennedy, also pushed out. Joe Kent resigned in protest over this war. Michael Anton from the State Department resigned, who designed the national security strategy that said we were not going to do Mideastern wars. He resigned in protest of all of this back in the winter. So all you have left that is in the anti-war camp is Vice President Vance and Undersecretary of Defense Elbridge Colby, who wrote the national defense strategy that also said we weren't going to do any more Mideastern wars. Everybody else has been pushed out and shoved out and drove out by the Israel lobby and Trump's erratic decision-making, despite whatever public stories you may have heard from these people or their representatives. That's the truth of the matter. It will come out in due time. So that leaves people like Vice President Vance even further isolated because there's been an internal war by the Rubio camp and the Israel lobby to marginalize Vice President Vance, leaking to Murdoch-based publications like the Daily Mail, like the New York Post, like the Wall Street Journal, etc. Vance is not focused on his own presidential aspirations for 2028 because he sees the writing on the wall that right now Republicans would get wiped out in the midterms and in 2028, principally because of this war. And so that's what's driving him. The intelligence community in the Pentagon has repeatedly communicated to the president, as has Energy Secretary Wright, that this stalemate cannot go on, that we do not have a military escalatory option that is viable to achieve those particular objectives that you laid out. There isn't a diplomatic mechanism anymore to achieve those objectives. Some of those could have been reached prior to the war, not anymore. There's not an economic stress metric to achieve that because we suffer far more economic stress than the Iranians do. The Iranians have survived under more restrictive conditions in the past, including less of their oil getting out during a part of the time during COVID in the 2019 sanctions and also in the 2013 sanction time period. Much more restrictive than it is currently. They've had a flood of cash come in over March and April because of the massive price spike in Iranian oil. So the net effect of it is that Iran is in a catbird seat because they can take the pain a lot better than us, and they can escalate a lot more dangerous to us. And that gives them the edge. So we're not going to get a depletion or diminution of their missiles or of their drones or of their manufacturing capacity to create both. We're not going, and as has been reported, because the Pentagon's leaking and the CIA is leaking and the intelligence agencies are leaking, all because the president's not listening. And they know that he reads every day the New York Times. So they're like, plant a story in the New York Times so that he'll be reminded of what it is he was supposed to have learned before. Sadly, this is how they're having to operate. This is why they're leaking so much. That's what they're saying. 80 to 90% of their missile capacity still there. 80 to 90% of their drone capacity still there. Their real Air Force and which is their missiles and drones, and their real Navy, which is the underwater drones, the go fast boats, the mini subs. All of that's still present. All of that's still fully capable. All of that's still fully able to inflict massive further harm
Great
on
point.
U.S. and global economic interests. Trump's been told this repeatedly. The military says there is no military option that's viable. So he knows there is no other option available other than either exit or a deal, but he will never sign a deal that looks anything vaguely like the Obama deal. So truly the only option president has at this point that could mitigate the harm is to exit, but he doesn't want to exit without saving face first. And
let me ask you a question on that, because Gary just put this up on the screen here. You talked about how there's almost nobody in Vice President Vance's corner anymore talking for sanity. But it seems like the Secretary of War here, Pete Hegseth, is still like eager to get back into conflict. Combat. What do you know about that?
Yes, I mean, basically, he's fallen off the wagon hard. So, you know, the neocon wagon hard, maybe some other wagons hard too. But so Heg's death, as Max Blumenthal properly termed him, of the gray zone, has been gung ho for this war all the way through, and he loves it. I mean, the central casting, if you wanted to make a bad B movie, that's what this war has been. He's still gung ho. He still loves the machismo. He still lives in denial. That's why Vice President Vance's office had to get out through the press to again make sure Trump read it in the newspapers the next morning that Hegseth keep lying to him. Hegseth will go in and contradict what General Kane or others have told the president in separate meetings. And he'll go in there and say, no, we can fully take them out. No, we can totally escalate. No, they're totally diminished. He will repeat overt and open lies to the president on a regular basis because he wants to be perceived as the winner. He knows that politically, once this war is over, if it ends on unfavorable terms, he's finished politically, finished publicly. He'll go down as the most disastrous and dumbest defense secretary or war secretary in American history. So he knows his only chance, the high probability he gets impeached if Democrats take the House in the fall because of his war crimes that he is repeatedly committing still to this day in the various Caribbean where we're still killing fishermen pretending they're drug dealers, not to mention what he's done in this war, including killing the girls at the beginning of the girls' school. So yes, right. But he keeps lying to the president, feeding his delusions, feeding his illusions of grandeur, feeding all of it, feeding him false intel and false information. And he's a major hurdle to getting a peace deal, even though everybody in the Pentagon disagrees with him and has told the president Hegseth is lying to him.
Wow. Well, let's take a look at what there's a couple of different pieces here I want to show you. One is that might possibly be a good sign. I'd like you to talk about this. I'm going to show you here Rebecca Heinrichs on Fox yesterday after the meeting did not produce this decisive decision that President Trump had talked about prior. And Rebecca Heinrichs has always been almost like Hegseth, man. She's been all in on combat. But listen to what she says here. And as you start this, remember what I just showed you about the claim that Rubio and especially Witkoff said about that, boy, there's all this nuclear stuff we had to go bomb it because they were in February. We're 10 days away from a nuclear bomb, but I'm not sure she's aware of how she contradicted that. Watch this.
This is something that the president has been very consistent on throughout the war, is that for him, it is of primary importance that the United States dismantle and remove the nuclear material. So I agree with the president's assessment that it's entombed right now. I mean, Midnight Hammer, Epic Fury has already significantly degraded the nuclear program, which is why I reject this notion that any deal, even a deal that I'm not happy with, on the nuclear program, any deal is still going to be way better than the Obama deal because we're starting from a totally different baseline, which is their nuclear program, and the weaponization aspect of it has been destroyed.
So the nuclear program is entombed from last year, i.e. there was therefore no justification to go to war now, but set that aside. But even if I might not like a deal, which is interesting, her body language, she's looking down and she's talking back. So she breaks eye contact, which means she probably really doesn't like it. But then she says, but this is still way better than Obama. So she's trying to say, look, here's a path out. Is that something that you think that some are trying to get him to do? And will he take it?
The problem is he wants a trophy the nuclear enriched material is all about a trophy. That's why even though Iran had repeatedly offered prior to the war, like they had done in the past, to transfer their existing enriched material to Russia, and Russia offered to accept it and made that pitch to the president as well. President Putin made that pitch to President Trump. Trump refuses now to even consider it. And the reason is he wants the trophy himself. It's, toddler want new toy. And if toddler don't get new toy, toddler bomb somebody. That's where we're at. It's comical in the way Dr. Strangelove was comical. How I learned to love the bomb. Basically that's where Trump's mindset is. And that's the problem. Iran knows this. And precisely for that reason, they will not give that to him. They will not give him a trophy because they consider that dangerous to their long-term deterrence. They need the world to see the U.S. forfeit and be perceived globally, doesn't have to be perceived in the U.S., but perceived globally as a U.S. strategic failure and humiliation on a global stage, because they think that's the best deterrence they have available to them. And I can't really say that they're wrong under the circumstances.
Yeah, and now if there is that group with inner circle to Trump that's trying to maybe say, hey, you know what, we should try to take this and we'll claim that it's better than Obama no matter what it is. There's another group led by General Jack Keane that is still apparently in the Hegseth camp.
My point is, it's unlikely they're going to change. No matter what deal we put together, at the end of it, they're going to want to recover everything that they're losing and go back to their original goals. So in the deal, and our negotiators understand this, we've got to have the provisions in there to prevent as much of that as possible from happening. The second thing is, we know they're going to cheat. Look at this. Right now, what's taking place just this week alone with the violation of the ceasefire in the Straits of Hormuz. Who's doing that? The Iranians are doing that. And we had to react to it. Look what they've done in Lebanon. The ceasefire began on April the 8th. And since April the 8th, less than 2 months, they have fired rockets and missiles into northern Israel over 900 times. 1,200 plus drones have been fired into northern Israel, all since April the 8th.
Okay, just a point there. There's number one, Iran is not in Lebanon firing into Israel, which he keeps claiming. That's the wrong one here. You might also want to notice that it was Israel that invaded Lebanon back on March 16th. So they started this war on their own, and now then they're suffering the normal consequences of it. But what do you make of the rest of that? Because whether there's somebody like J.D. Vance, whether there's somebody like Heinrichs, or even others that are saying, oh, crap, because they see the fundamentals that you're talking about. They are cognitively aware, and they say this can't succeed well for us. And they may even see we are headed to international humiliation. But then you got these guys over here. What do you think President Trump is going to do? Where do we go from here in the last bit of time we have with you?
Yeah, a lot of confession through projection, both by General Keane and by President Trump. It's the U.S. that keeps breaching the ceasefire. It's Israel that keeps breaching the ceasefire. It's Israel that initiated the war in Lebanon and refuses to pull out and stop its bombing of Beirut. If a kid isn't being killed somewhere by Israel every day, it appears the IDF is quite unhappy, and Bibi Netanyahu didn't get his ritual sacrifice. That's who he's right. There's somebody that's unreliable. There's somebody that's untrustworthy. There's somebody that keeps breaching the ceasefire. It's the U.S. and Israel. That's who it is. The issue is that the president is in a mindset where he refuses to do a deal. He will always, this is why Joe Kent was right from the get-go. If you understood where the president's mindset was and the Israel lobby's motivations were, then you knew that the president would never sign a deal. And so our best hope is to exit. I mean, the president was actually floating around with people. Could he fire the vice president? Because he was mad at Vance disagreeing with him on the Iran war. And it's like, no, there's a lot of other things you can try to do unconstitutionally, but that everybody recognizes is too far. That gives you an idea where his mindset and mentality is. I mean, truth be told, the only way we're going to exit is if Trump is the pressure points are the allies in the region are no longer allied for going in kinetically, at least particularly Qatar and the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Bahrain. Bahrain will just follow whatever Saudis do. But the Emiratis are still okay with it because those guys are nuts. But everybody else wants out, wants done, wants finished. They need to use their leverage to escalate. Because, I mean, think about it. There is another way, and this idea has been broached with the president. The way Iran could really humiliate Trump is, let's say they get a deal with Pakistan or someone else. Let's say they do decide to. The reason why they don't have nuclear weapons is self-limitation, not foreign sanctions, not anything else. Yes, it's true they really could get nuclear weapons if they wanted to. It's just their own intelligence concluded they didn't want to, for both religious reasons, a fatwa against it, which is now no longer in effect with us murdering the Ayatollah, but also because they don't want to unleash an arms race, a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, because they know the Saudis will get it, Turks will then get it, and you've got a bit of an issue. But now increasingly they're being taught maybe they need it anyway. The fatwa no longer exists. They have relationships with Pakistan, Russia, China, and North Korea, all nuclear armed powers. Maybe they even show off. Like, let's say all of a sudden out of the blue, they say President Trump watch at 3 p.m. on Press TV, and they show a nuclear test bomb going off. And maybe that's for show, maybe that's something else. But imagine how humiliating that would be for President Trump, that in the name of taking away their nuclear arsenal, he inspired and ended up leading to them getting a nuclear weapon. That would be the ultimate humiliation for the president. That idea has been broached with the president this past week, that could happen. And so hopefully all of that fear motivates him more than fear of the Israel lobby and fear of comparison to Obama. He can avoid the latter by just not doing a deal, but just get out and let Qatar be the funnel by which money gets released. So he can say he didn't send any money. Qatar sent the money, even though it's really our money through the Qatari banks that it happens. Who cares? Anything that gives him cover so that Iran gets what they need. But he's got to do the Reagan strategy. What was the Reagan strategy after the Beirut bombings? Get out and tell Israel, stand down. Until he does both, this war will drag on, the stalemate will drag on, and the global economy will get closer and closer to going boom.
Oh boy, I have been warning for years, and especially in the run up to this, that we could perversely push Iran to get the bomb. The very thing we have always been claiming is our objective to prevent. We may push them into it. And I pray to God that whatever has been told to the president doesn't happen, and that we don't discover that we passed that, because, man, there's going to be a different world on the day after that happens than we've ever existed in my lifetime. And that's something we don't need to worry about. So it'd be a great time to have some kind of either walk away or negotiated settlement. I don't care which, but let's get this over with so that doesn't happen. But we'll continue to monitor this. Listen, really appreciate you coming down on a Saturday. I really do. And by the way, for everybody's knowledge, you mentioned Joe Kent a few times. He's going to be on the show this afternoon. We're going to talk about how some of the things with Israel started this war, and then how things continue to escalate. And here recently, we're even talking about yesterday, maybe a connection and a closer linkage of the U.S. Armed Forces with the IDF and where that's going to go. Are we really an America first? He's going to be talking about that this afternoon. Also, though, just to let people know, anybody who ever wants to meet Robert Barnes in person, and we got a lot of folks watching this show, they're going to get a chance in August. Gary, if you can pop that up on the screen if you don't have it. But Robert, tell us just a little bit about what this event is, which, by the way, I'll be attending as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you can meet Daniel Davis in person. Meet Alexander McCoras and Alex Christoforou of the Duran in person. Meet James Webb in person. Meet Chase Hughes in person. Basically, this is the 1776 Law Center annual conference. 1776 Law Center has represented everybody from the Covington kids to Joe Kent to Robin Grits to whistleblowers to Amish farmer Amos Miller. Basically, this is the main fundraising mechanism to support a lot of financial freedom, food freedom, medical freedom, political freedom cases against the surveillance state of the industrial state, big ag, big pharma, big media, and all the rest. But it will be a 2-day conference. These packed and stacked. We have a former White House chef coming down and is going to be doing the dinner for folks.
Oh,
so
nice.
And we got everybody dressed up. I got to admit, Larry Johnson's going to be there. Larry is probably the most impressive. It's like he's got a natural. We put him in the revolutionary outfit. It's like, boom, he looks like a revolutionary general. Wow, he had family.
He really does, man.
But yeah, you look at him. We got Daniel Davis. We got everybody dressed up. Alexander McCoras looks like a real natural general. James Webb looks like a front stage colonel. But Larry Johnson looks like the biggest badass in the whole bunch. So credit to Larry for looking the best.
He does, man. That is awesome. Looking forward.
But all that's it. 1776lawcenter.com.
Yeah, look forward. Y'all all come and see us, man. You can see Robert Barnes, Larry Johnson, Alexander Mercurius in person, man. Whatever the price is, it's low. So be sure and join us up. and we'll look forward to seeing you guys in August. And thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
But that's not all the news that we have. So let's continue on here. Even things in the last 24 hours, we're continuing to go down the path in the Russia-Ukraine war to where we're trying to figure out what is that going to happen here. Because you may recall that I think in yesterday's show, we talked about how Sergei Lavrov had been making some really strong statements against both Kiev and possibly even Europe. Dmitry Polyansky, the Russian ambassador to the OSCE, on our show and elsewhere in Russian media, was making some very provocative statements. Karaganov, even more provocative than that on the Glenn Deason show. Well, yesterday, President Putin was going to make a press statement. And so everybody was thinking, wow, man, what's going to happen here? Because surely he's going to put the coup de grace on top of that. But instead, he kind of went a little bit passive.
Do you think we should expect an end, and where could that happen? As to the timelines, I think both you and your colleagues realize that naming specific time frames while the combat is ongoing would be a mistake. It's not something that is done, and it's not something I'm going to do now.
How do you estimate the state of the negotiations, considering what happened in Starobelsk and the fact that President Trump is busy with other things? Well, it is put on hold, as they say. We maintain certain contacts. I'm not going to hide it, but there are no negotiations per se. Even though we are open for talks, we have never refused to have talks. We were not the ones to stop them. We are ready to go on with them.
So he's like, yeah, the war, and in some of his other comments, he's like, the special military operation, it'll eventually come to an end. I'm not going to tell you when, but, eventually. And about Europe, I mean, we're talking to them, but, I mean, they're not really listening. But, we're trying to find nothing at all what these guys were saying. And again, there's lots of talk that something big is coming in Kiev, something that we have a scale that we have not seen in the war. And we just saw something in Kiev from the Russian side in both drones and missile strikes, to include an Oreshnik, apparently, that just days ago that was pretty substantial. But apparently that's nothing apparent compared to what is coming now. Now, that was President Putin yesterday. Now, his yin to his yang, and the good cop versus the bad cop, Dmitry Medvedev, today released a video of his own. We're not going to have audio here because it's got some music underneath it, but it's translated and it's got subtext on the front. His language was somewhat different. So, Gary, if you can run that back again, let me read that out loud in case anybody wasn't able to read this. Its print was pretty small. He says, just like with the terrorist attack in Starobelsk, the blood is on the hands of scumbags like Ursula, Merz, Macron, Starmer, and all the other repugnant parasites. So shut your pie hole. You haven't seen anything yet. And then, of course, now you see here are these ICBMs. These are, I think, most or all of these are nuclear weapons. And then he mocks, through AI, et cetera, what these guys are thinking. But again, this looks really Karaganov-like. So the question is, who do you want to believe? Do you want to believe the Lavrov, Karaganov, Polyansky, and here Medvedev, or the more passive Putin? I mean, he's the decision maker. He's the ultimate decision maker, but the way the Russian systems work, it's not like a dictator like many in the West always characterize it. There is a decision-making body. Nothing gets out that's not approved, though. So we got to understand that. It's not like these guys are off the reservation, Putin saying one thing and Medvedev and another, and the diplomats are saying something else. And believe me, this stuff is all coordinated. So I don't know what their intentions are or whatever, because it's definitely some mixed messages here. But there have been, I'm told, a lot of traffic seen on rail traffic, a lot of road traffic, which implies that a lot of military hardware and ammunition, especially missiles, have been moved and are being consolidated at various points inside of Russia, which could imply that something very big is coming. We're going to have to wait and see how that's going to work out. But it doesn't look very good. I'll just tell you that, because perhaps it is that Putin's saying, well, I'm not going to signal this right now, but let's wait and see what does or doesn't happen in Kiev here in the near term, because his statements could be quite different on the other side of that one. More to follow on that. Let's take a look at some of the other things that happened this week. However, we had Professor Marandi, who was going back to the situation in the Iran deal, and he came and told us. He said, "Listen, when this war started, because I had asked him, I said, before this war started, whether it was when Soleimani was assassinated or your embassy was hit by Israel in Syria, there was a pretty tepid response and a non-escalatory response by Iran. Where is that now?" Here's what he had to say.
In the past, the Iranians were always trying to prevent escalation from happening. We saw that in previous attacks by the United States against Iranian sovereignty, the Israeli regime bombing our embassies, in our embassy in Syria a couple of years ago, the Americans murdering General Soleimani a few years ago in Iraq, in Baghdad International Airport, by the airport. But now, after this war, the Iranians have decided that they will not hold back anymore. I think a certain threshold has been crossed, and the Iranians are going to be very tough from now on. But in addition to all of that, the fact remains that the siege continues. And the U.S. siege on the Persian Gulf is effectively bringing down the global economy. And every day that goes by, the United States is simply shooting itself in the foot once again.
I mean, it's almost as though that were a live thing, and he literally just watched Robert Barnes, because that echoes precisely what Robert Barnes just told you live on the show here, is that Iran knows the situation. They are sober-minded and well aware of all the fundamentals here. And as Professor Marandi said elsewhere during that show, is that Iran is hurting. He said, it's no joke. The U.S. blockade is not inconsequential. There is high inflation. There is high unemployment. There's a lot of hardship on the people. He said they're suffering. There's no question. But he said that we know how to suffer. We've had a lot of experience at it. But we also see what's happening in the global marketplace, the global economy, and diplomatically around the world. And we are calculating we can go a lot longer at this, and we are in the driver's seat. You see him say that. Now, sticking with the Iranian side, we also had Nima Al-Horshid on the show. Always has such great ideas and great viewpoints, and he kind of brings it at a different angle than Professor Marandi does, and so adds another level of understanding. And here he's saying that right now, that the Iranian side doesn't have a need to militarily escalate, because they can just kind of sit back and watch things unfold or unwind, as it may be.
They feel that they don't need to escalate because they have the dominance in the region. They don't need to attack anybody. But if the United States attacks them, they can respond in a proper manner. That's the understanding on their part right now.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. Presumably, President Trump is going to make some kind of announcement this afternoon.
It's not going to change. Sorry for interrupting you. Let's assume that Donald Trump announcing that, we reached some sort of deal or agreement. That's not going to change the current. That's the war is going on and on as long as Israel is attacking Lebanon.
I felt that, as you could tell from the context there, that was while President Trump was in the Situation Room yesterday. And I thought that was really interesting, the way that Nima said, we don't even care. Whatever does or doesn't come out of that, it makes no difference to us. We're on a path that we can sustain and that we feel like we can succeed in over time. And I think that is pretty clear what the Iranian side has done. They have said nothing but, and I showed yesterday some of the comments on social media from some of their senior military advisors at the governmental level, that they're absolutely prepared for war. That Ghalibaf, their senior diplomat, said that if we can't get this through negotiations, then we'll get it through military means. So they're very cognizant that the military power of the United States, which they don't underestimate, and they don't want to have to endure it, because they know that it caused profound physical damage during the first 40 days. And they know that if it gets resumed, there's going to be more. But they believe and they calculate that they can endure that too, and that they can escalate. If we start it, they can escalate it into the region that would be catastrophic for the region and the global economy. that will take years to unwind, and in my view, will permanently knock us out of the ranks of the great powers in the world, because we will be a pariah to even our allies, because so many other people around the world will be hurt. Russia and China don't have to do anything; they can just sit back and watch us self-immolate. And it's people probably starting in the region. Just because imagine what the reality would be if Iran does that, because we restarted the war, and now then they're devastated, and their governments and their way of life is at risk, especially if desalinization plants gets hit. But even just from the oil infrastructure, because that's their massive portion of all of their national income, gets gouged and devastated, and puts them at risk of having their governments collapse, because we chose to fight a war that never needed to be fought. And we have handed control of the Strait of Hormuz to a country that never had it before and would never have had it. Those things alone are going to cause a great recalculation and recalibration of America's place in the world and how others are willing to view it. And I'm telling you, it won't be good for us. One other thing we want to talk about today, and that's from Europe. A couple of things we want to point out here. Scott Ritter was on the show, and we were asking him some questions about this looming attack on Kiev and what that may mean for the course of the war.
Everything you're showing here, all these targets were involved in the manufacture of FP1 drones. The drones being used to strike Starobelsk Teachers College. And the Russians struck, destroying these and destroying the command centers. It's believed that the Oreshnik was fired against the command center of the drones used to direct the strike. The Russians have a very good intelligence picture of what's going on. They avoid these very kinds of targets because, again, these are targets that, you know, from a visual perspective, don't look good, and so Russia's avoided. But when these places are building drones that are used to murder sleeping student teachers in their dormitory, then Russia has no choice. So they struck it. But these are not national command and control targets. These are targets related to the action on Starobelsk. What Russia is getting ready to do is take out the parliament, take out the presidential administration, take out the defense ministry, take out the major infrastructure of the government of Ukraine. They're going to erase the government of Ukraine, at least the infrastructure. Sure, they'll be evacuated, people will run. It's called shake the tree, people. I've done it for a living. You blow these things up and now they have to relocate. And Russia has good intelligence. As I said, if they know where your secret FP1 production facility is, they're going to know where Zelensky runs to. And eventually you're going to catch up and they're going to kill them. This is a death sentence for Ukraine. Understand that every single member of the Ukrainian government has been indicted in Russia for crimes against humanity, for murder.
Well, that speaks for itself. I don't hardly need to make any commentary there. That's how Scott Ritter views it. He's very well connected to many people in Russia, and we've been showing you some of the public statements made by many Russian officials. I think they are really, really serious about this. And again, if anything breaks even over the weekend, you can count on us. We'll come and bring it right to you. But I'll tell you somebody whose attention it did get, and that is Volodymyr Zelensky earlier today.
Today at night or tomorrow at night, we think that we will have a big attack from Russian side using drones, using cruise missiles and ballistic. And we see the preparation. Always we see the preparation. By the way, we are thankful to United States and European partners when they share with us intelligence. So when we know that Russia prepares a big massive attack, definitely our partners also know, maybe not a lot of details, but we know. So today, of course, I didn't address yet to my country. I will do it a little bit later in the evening. And of course, I will say that our people have to be very, very careful, cautious, and children, and they have to use bomb shelters, because today at night or tomorrow at night, high percent. Of course, nobody knows the 100%, but there is a high percent.
So he's aware of something coming. And you can see, especially if you've been watching him for quite a long time, you know, when he makes a lot of statements, he's got this really cocky look and very confident, very self-confident. And there was none of that in here. The body language was that he's like, no, I really believe this. And I feel pretty confident that Russia is sending intermediaries and back channel negotiations and saying, no, this is not a bluff. We're actually going to come. Now, whether they hit all the targets that Scott mentioned there, I don't know, but those are all profound targets, because he said the defense ministry, their foreign ministry, their parliament, the presidential palace, etc. Main targets, and they could also, I've heard elsewhere, could go after economic centers, banking, etc. Stuff that would cripple the country's ability to do commerce, even. So there could be something super, super big, or it could be a combination of that. It could be less than that. That's all speculation at this point. But you can see in his face, he believes something's coming because he claimed he's going to talk to his people. I said that was today. Obviously, you saw the date on there. That was actually last night. So when he thinks something could be coming potentially as early as this weekend, that would kind of line up with the timing and the warnings given by the Russian side. Again, this statement by Medvedev this morning. So it could be a very, very difficult time for Ukraine. And the real question is going to be, what happens next? Let's just say that some version of that happens, and Russia does strike in something that's substantially bigger than anything that they have ever done to this point in the war, all 4.5 years inside Kiev. What then does the West do? Does the West double down? Does the West say, terrific, this justifies all of our demonizing of Russia from the beginning, and now we can get even more military funding, we can get more weapons and transfer more into the defense industrial base, et cetera, and then they just, wrap up the rhetoric? Or do they recognize those targets could shift to the West, and those same weapon systems and those same missiles and those same aircraft that are going to be dropping all these bombs could just have different aim points further to the West? And that, just like there's no air defense left anymore of any substance over Kiev, the West has a paltry. I don't even know that the West has as much air defense, according to some things that I've read, than the Ukrainians do. So they would know that whatever's fired, and especially the Oreshnik, it doesn't matter, that's going to get through anything. But even the Kinzhals and the Kh-101s and even some of the long-range drones, if you don't have adequate air defense, even the Garand 2s are going to get through, and they have a long range. So the question is going to be, what will Europe do next, and will Russia follow through? So this whole thing could expand way beyond the confines of the Ukrainian border. That's what we're going to be watching for here. But this is potentially a very dangerous moment, not just in the Middle East, but also in Europe. Now, before we let you go today, there's one other piece of information, one other video that we got about Europe, because we're going to stick on that same term here. And what you're about to see is someone's imagination about what it would look like for in reference to this drone issue that happened. You may have seen. I didn't talk much about it because it was kind of irrelevant. That allegedly a Russian drone went into Romania and hit a building somewhere, which I thought was odd. And I didn't mention it because if Russia was going to do something to hit Romania, they sure aren't going to send one drone into some random building. It would be something important. So I did just kind of dismiss that, but it got everybody fired up on the European side. So someone put together this video kind of imagining what did the Europeans' big powers, and that's France and Germany, what did they say, and what would Putin have responded?
Did you hear the news? It's an outrage. Yeah, people are taking sick leave when they are sick. Not that. I mean, Russia has launched a drone into Romania. Maybe it's time we do something about it. Time to break out the big guns. Let's call him now. I'm gonna live forever. Hello?
Monsieur Putin, you have made a serious violation.
Yes, it's an outrage. You provoke. Can't stop, won't stop.
Well, you leave us no choice. We are going to deploy Europe's most fearsome weapon.
A ruthlessly destructive power. We are issuing you,
Vladimir, a statement of the strongest
condemnation.
I'm sorry, especially when we're talking about war and peace stuff, that maybe that's a little inappropriate. I don't know, but there's so much truth to it, because that is what Europe has done so well. They love to talk a big game and they do nothing about it. And Russia's sitting around and going, wait, that's it? That's what you're going to do? Because I think we're kind of to that point right now. That's where we are, folks. Appreciate you on a Saturday. Look forward to it. We're going to be back here in about an hour or so. Just watch the listings. I haven't got the exact
progress, or I don't know if we can call it some sort of progress, but the latest situation between Iran and the United States. And it seems that Donald Trump has sent a letter or a message to Iran, written message to Iranians by the Pakistani government. And as New York Times is talking about it, he's sending his latest, some sort of ultimatum to Iranians. What do we know about that? So far, we haven't heard from Iranian what is in that letter and what is in that message. But from the point of view of Iranians today, there are some points, some important points, crucial points that cannot be changed. I would say the first thing is the case of Lebanon and the war in Lebanon, between Lebanon and Israel. And Israel has just crossed the Litani River in the southern part of Lebanon. They're just going, you remember, they defined a yellow line in the southern part of Lebanon. Then they crossed that yellow line, Litani River, right now crossing that. And it seems that they're thinking of creating a dead zone, a buffer zone in southern part of Lebanon. The same they did in the southern part of Syria, you remember, with Golan Heights. And the problem is that if you recall what was happened with the Golan Heights, it was all about a buffer zone between Syria and Israel. Then after the fall of Bashar Assad, they went, further and further and going more to the northern part of Syria. This is the plan on the part of Israelis. They define a buffer zone and then you expand the buffer zone and going up and destroying everything. And this is a buffer zone getting bigger and bigger. And later on, they want to send the settlers to those regions. But the Israeli problem is that Lebanon is not going to be Syria. There is no, Bashar Assad is gone. He's not there anymore. We have a new so-called government in Syria under the al-Jolani, the former head chopper of HTS and Daesh or ISIS, who's running Syria today. And they're under the full control of the United States. There is nothing to do when it comes to Turkey and other countries. It was before the fall of Assad, you remember, it was all about Iran and Russia is trying to manipulate Syria. They're doing everything there. They're making the problems in that region. They're supporting Assad. Assad is killing people. Just remember what has happened since the fall of Bashar Assad. How many people these, al-Jolani and his gang, they have killed so far. And how many of them were killed by Israelis? Israel is bombing every time they go to do something with Lebanon or Gaza. They hit some targets in Syria. This is the plan on the part of Israelis. But when it comes to the southern part of Lebanon, I don't know if you saw the latest footages coming out of Lebanon. They're just having a lot of... Lebanon is not going to be Syria. I would say even under Assad, they were not that much tough. It was all about the Iranian presence, Russian presence. They're helping the Assad government. But Lebanon, the story in Lebanon is totally different. Hezbollah is a very trained and prepared army. They can fight on the ground. They can use their, they don't have many things to fight, but they have drones. They have the most important, they have rockets. They don't have ballistic missiles, but they have rockets. And the rockets are quite capable. They hit the targets in the northern part of Israel and in the city of Kirash. I just forgot the name. And they hit the target, and the Iron Dome failed to intercept the rockets. These are rockets. These are not ballistic missiles or something of that sort. So it shows how weak Israel is today, these days. It's the outcome of the war between Israel and Iran, between the United States and Iran. That's why they're so weak right now as we talk. And Hezbollah knows that. The plan in the southern part of Lebanon, I'm going to get back to what's going on between Iran and the United States, but I think the case of Lebanon is so important. There is no way of achieving any sort of agreement between Iran and the United States without considering Lebanon. That's why I'm trying to, to describe what's going on, what is happening in the southern part of Lebanon. So by the use of FPV drones, just moments ago before coming to this, I saw new footages. They're hitting all these vehicles, Israeli vehicles, the vehicles that go in there to help the soldiers, or those who are carrying those vehicles that are carrying the Israeli soldiers. They're getting hit by FPV drones. So they're destroying everything. Air defense system is not even able to defend itself. The air defense system batteries, Iron Dome batteries, got hit more than 5-10 times so far in the last week. So we can understand the gravity of the problem that Israel is facing right now. Is a strategic, as they call it in Israel. They say that this is not a technical problem. This is a strategic problem. And they have no solution for that. There is no solution, even you know what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. Even a country as powerful as Russia, when it comes, and we have to consider, is a huge territory. And these Ukrainians are sending the drones to killing civilians in Russia. And this is the problem with drones. And Israeli, they don't have air defense system like Russia has. They don't have S-400, S-500, S-300. These are huge. These are the best air defense systems on this planet. No one has those air defense systems. Just imagine what Israel has. Iron Dome, Patriot system, and THAAD. The Patriot system and THAAD were somehow neutralized during the war between Iran and Israel, because they have used all those interceptors, most of them, during the war. And they're so afraid, because if something happens between Iran and the United States, they're going to get hit again and again. So they have to keep those interceptors. They don't want to use them. They have to be cautious, because they don't have many of them to be used. That's why they're using Iron Dome. These looking at the price of these drones, how expensive are these drones? They're not that expensive. And the price of these interceptors for the air defense system, it's not even comparable. So Israel is fighting in a war that they don't have the ability to fight back. Their air defense system is failing. And it's showing that they cannot hit the FPV drone. They try to make some sort of nets to avoid these FPV drones hitting the target, but that didn't work so far. That's why they themselves said that this is a strategic problem for Israel. So, in my opinion, they can go in the southern part of Lebanon. They can hit the targets. They can destroy the cities and villages. But does it mean that they can keep the land? No, they cannot do it. This is the reality, as they cannot use the northern part of Israel. Just remember what is happening in the northern part of Israel. They don't have it. And since the war in Gaza, the Israeli war on Gaza and on Palestinians started, the attacks in the northern part of Israel just removed the people, the settlers, from the northern part. Since then, they didn't get back. And some of them got back, and then Hezbollah escalated, hit the targets in the northern part, that they returned to the central or to the southern part of Israel. And this is the reality. If they want to stay in this southern part of Lebanon, nobody gonna get back to the northern part of Israel. That's so simple. It doesn't matter what Israel is talking about. I'm gonna create a buffer zone or dead zone, whatever they have in their mind. This is not gonna be a new Golan Heights for Israel. And Hezbollah is not Bashar Assad. It's totally different. They're prepared to fight to the last one. And they're getting stronger. Believe me, they're getting stronger. They're stronger than they were before the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. Today, they are stronger. Israel is just destroying cities because Hezbollah doesn't have the air defense system. They have, air defense system, but the air defense system they have is just somehow is just to hit drones or some vehicles, but they're not capable of hitting fighter jets. This is the problem on the part of Hezbollah. But when it comes to the underground, the forces, the real fight, Israel is not even comparable with Hezbollah. Hezbollah was fighting ISIS, Daesh for such a long time. In Syria, in Iraq, they're prepared. They're so trained. And those people who are running Hezbollah today are the same people who were fighting on the battlefield directly with Daesh or with ISIS. This is the leverage they have. And putting that aside, there is no way for Iranians to just ignore what's going on between Israel and Lebanon and make some sort of agreement with the United States. That's the main point. That's the first point. And you remember in all these negotiations, direct negotiations, indirect negotiations, messages, written messages, sending back and forth, it was all about the first point. The first step was about putting an end to war on all fronts. It's not only Lebanon, it's about Palestine as well. It's about Gaza and the West Bank as well. So you can get it. If you want some sort of ceasefire, you have to do everything. The United States, that's why I don't see anything happening between Iran and the United States. There is no capability in the Trump administration to achieve any sort of agreement or deal. He loves to call it deal because he's a deal maker in his mind. But he's not. He didn't show any sort of sign to us that he's able to do that. Did he do it in Ukraine? Did he do it? Does he have any sort of good relationship with any country on this planet? Europeans were his allies. What is the relationship between the United States and Europe today? What is the relationship between Russia and the United States today? You remember the summit in Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska. So I'm going to go there, talking about for 1 week and then everything going to be changed. This is going to be the game changer summit and we're going to bring the two countries together, putting an end to the war in Ukraine. Nothing happened. It's just about, the guy is just making noises. He's a showman. He wants to be in the news, nothing more than that. Because when he gets back, here comes the establishment. You have to do this, you have to do that. And everyone knows who's the establishment by now. The establishment doesn't want to put an end to the war in Ukraine. The establishment is somehow, I would say, I don't know how much the establishment was involved in the decisions to start this war against Iran. But the establishment is all Zionist. They all support Israel. And the reason, even they had some sort of differences with Donald Trump not to start the war against Iran, it wasn't about not attacking or not starting a new war in the Middle East. This is the same establishment or deep state that started those wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, name it. They destroyed many countries for years. This is the same. But the argument, the difference that they have right now in the United States, no, we were not ready to start this war. Why is that? Because Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not Afghanistan. They're going to fight back. This is the problem with the establishment. But after all, there is no difference. When Donald Trump gets back, he's going to have the same sort of idea. The Israeli lobby, the Zionists, Lindsey Graham, Mike Levin or all these people. These are, if you want to understand what's going on in Washington, look at what Lindsey Graham is talking about. Look at what we are making. You're making jokes about these guys. But believe me, these people are running the show in Washington. This is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is nobody in Washington. He has no idea. He has no he's in the business of making money for himself and his family. And he's doing great, believe me, in achieving that. He's doing great. And he is satisfied. He doesn't need, and he was asked about the financial system of the American people. He said, I don't care about that. We have to remove Iranian, threat. What is the Iranian threat? Is the Iranian nuclear program. They want to produce more bombs, more missiles. They want to destroy Israel. And after Israel, they're going to go after us. This is what he's selling to American people. And nobody's pushing back and say, when did Iran say that they're going to attack the United States? When did that happen? What's in it for Iran to attack the United States? Who's gonna? No one wants to attack the United States. Russia doesn't want it. China doesn't want it. Iran doesn't want it. Why? It's on the other side of the planet. What do they have? It's the United States coming to the West Asia. Look at Iran today. Look at the Iranian map today. Look at all those big and beautiful Trump's bases in the Middle East that were surrounding Iran before this war started. Who's coming to the neighborhood? Who's putting pressure on other countries? Who pushed the NATO to the borders, to the doorstep of Russia? Who forced Russia to start a war? Who said, you are nothing. We're going to crush you. We're going to crush your economy. We're going to crush your army in Ukraine. We're going to trap you in Ukraine. After all, we're going to divide you. We're going to destroy Russia. We're going to break it down in federations. Who was trying to do this? It wasn't the Trump administration. It was the Biden administration. But it was a process started and finished by the Biden administration. No, Donald Trump was part of that plan. You remember when Donald Trump was the president in his first term, as he brags every time he's talking about the war in Ukraine. I sent JASSMs to Ukrainian army. No one gave those missiles or weapons to Ukraine. I did that. He's part of the plan. He's not part of the solution. And many people in the United States are not happy with that. These are I'm talking about the ordinary people. This is going to be a ceasefire between the two sides, a temporary ceasefire. And then they started with some sort of turmoil, some sort of protests in Iran. And they have everything. They did everything. Right now, when you put the puzzle all together, all these pieces together, the U.S. Treasury Secretary said Trump administration came into power in the United States, what they did to bring down or to destroy the Iranian economy. He said that. We know what has happened to the Iranian economy because you remember, I was in Iran in December 2025, in January, when those protests happened in Iran. I saw those protests. I was watching what was happening inside Iran. In the first 2 days, it was protests. It's all about the inflation, the economy, the problem people were facing. And then the government tried to negotiate with protesters, with economists, with the elites of Bazaar, as they go, elites of the market, Iranian market. So when they perceive that Iran, the government is doing something, so they started with, to turn the protests into riots, and they destroyed banks. Of the ambulances in Tehran were destroyed during those days. And many people, innocent people, were killed. I sent them to Turkish, to these terrorists, to the Kurdish people in Iraq, to send them to Iranian people, to the Iranian people, so-called people. But he said those weapons didn't get in the hand of the Iranian people, but they got in the hand, because Turkish, these Kurdish people in Iraq said, we don't have those weapons. Where are those weapons? And Iran is finding those weapons little by little. You look at the pictures coming out of Iran, how the intelligence, how the Iranian security forces are capturing or getting these weapons that are in the hand of those rioters who were paid, who were armed by the United States, putting pressure on their economy, destroying the lives of the people of Iran, and sending the weapons to kill themselves, to kill the people of Iran. The same scenario, the same CIA scenario, the same scenario they did in Maidan in Ukraine. They had snipers at the same time hitting the people and the forces and the security forces and the police. They did the same in Iran. This is the same scenario. By the way, they had these Iranian in diaspora, the son of the former Shah of Iran, and coming out and so go, whoever supports me, go into the streets and do the protests, capture the institutions in Iran. And these are the hands. And just 3 days ago, we've learned from a new article in Financial Times, they paid a Iranian channel. It's an Iranian channel. It's a Persian channel that speaks Persian, which is based in the United Kingdom. This channel received, before those protests happened in Iran, they received $820 million. They received that, to help the whole ad, to bring that chaos to the Iranian society. They were part of the plan. They did everything. They did their maximum. So this is the problem that Iran was facing. before this war started. Then when they saw that everything is not going the way that is Donald Trump thought, he can bring down the government. And then Netanyahu had Mossad was telling the Trump administration, this is the moment. Everything, the chaos, there is a huge chaos in Iran. This is the moment, and we have to attack all together. You remember in June 2025, it was Israel attacking Iran. It wasn't the United States. But the Trump administration finalized that attack by B-2, B-52 bombers going to Iran and hitting some targets in Fordo, in nuclear facilities, hitting nuclear facilities in Iran. Then the second part, Netanyahu said, so everything is ready right now. We had the protests, we had the riot, the society is fractured, everything is coming down, and we need to attack. And it's not going to take too much time to bring down the government. If we destroy the Iranian government, then there would be no Iran anymore. There would be no Iran. They were prepared for the Kurdish, Turkish, Baluchi. They had their oppositions, not in Iran, outside of Iran. Those people in diaspora said, we're going to manage. They have prepared documents to have separate states or separate provinces to be run, domestically, not by the government. So they had planned everything to destroy Iran and divide it in provinces. This was the plan. So the Trump administration was convinced by Israelis, let's start the attacks. And then, the guy is a total gambler. He loves to gamble. So he started, and it wasn't just about what Mossad said. Mossad helped them with the case of Venezuela. It wasn't just the United States and CIA. Mossad helped them with the case of Venezuela. And they created this sort of delusion and illusion for Donald Trump that if we try to do the same thing, there is no support for the Iranian government. Nobody's supporting the Iranian leadership. They hate their government. They hate their leadership. And they had this so-called Iranian expert here in the West, and every time they're invited again, Iranian regime, this regime is unpopular, this regime is just destroying everything, they're killing the people, the society is just, it's just getting hit by, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable to see these experts say Iran is weaker than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Iran is nothing right now. Iran can do nothing. The military is, they created. I don't know if they were playing in the hand of CIA. They were providing some sort of false information. So they helped the mindset in the Trump administration to attack Iran. The case of Venezuela has had a huge impact, huge influence on what Donald Trump has decided to do with the case of Iran. So the attack happened. They saw as time went by, it's going to be 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. So nothing is happening. Let's continue. And they have depleted their stockpile in the United States. The THAAD systems were destroyed in the Middle East. They brought the THAAD system outside of the region from South Korea. They asked the government in Poland to send air defense system to Israel or to Jordan to help Israel, to defend Israel. I don't know how many of those air defense systems in Europe, they could remove them from Europe to send them to Israel. But from what we've seen from the news, what is provided in the news on the scene, on behind the scene, we haven't seen that the Polish government said, I know we're not going to send our air defense system because we have a fight here, we have a war between Europe and Russia. how ridiculous is that? But that was their argument. So the United States did everything. And today, if they start the war, they can hit. They've sent many weapons and missiles to the Middle East, even before they sent, you remember on February 28th, they were preparing for that attack that has happened on February 28th. And today they have more missiles, more weapons in the region if they want to start a new war against Iran. And Iran knows that. They have more missiles. But the problem is that they don't have the air defense system for Israel. If they start the war, Israel gonna turn into Gaza. Iran gonna level Israel if they start the war. Not only Israel, the whole region gonna be influenced by the war. They have to use, there is no way Iraq and all these countries around Iran. And Iran gonna start the new round of war. There would be no UAE to be the ally of Israel, to be the ally of Israel in the West Asia. They can level UAE. UAE was the only country you remember during, for days of war. It doesn't help us. We cannot survive. We have to get closer to China if the United States decides not to help us. These are not countries. These are not real countries. It doesn't matter how strong is their currency. They don't have the economy. But Iran is a country, is an economy. They produce 95% of the food they use. They have more than what they that's why they're exporting food and many things from Iran to other countries. They're dependent when it comes to soybeans, when it comes to some sort of, when it comes to wheat, because rice and bread are one of the most important, foods on the Iranian table. So they're somehow dependent on rice and wheat, which is the basis for bread. But it basically comes from India, Pakistan. Pakistan is a neighboring country. They don't have any problem. We've seen how Pakistan is facilitating the situation with the blockade, with the American blockade in the Persian Gulf. They were helping Iranians to somehow reduce the influence of the American blockade. And right now, Donald Trump is asking Iran to surrender. He's telling Iran he wants total surrender of Iranians. And he feels that he's winning. I don't know if he really feels that way, or he's trying to make this sort of argument to sell it to American people, or those people who are still supporting him in this war in the Middle East. Because from the polls, we know that more than 70% of American people are against the war in the Middle East and what's going on between Iran and the United States. But he has his support within the Republican Party, the MAGA base. And here is what he said about the war with Iran and how he perceives the war and how the mainstream media in the United States is talking about it.
The white flag of surrender, we give up to the great American military, the most powerful military. We give up, we give up, we give up. The New York Times would say, Iran has fought bravely and has defeated the United States of America. I mean, the coverage is so bad. You have a big win in a battle, and they say you lost. You knock out their entire Navy, and they say their Navy's doing fantastically. No, it was defeated, totally defeated. And they say, it's just a terrible thing for our country. And, to really be great, you need a fair media. And we don't have a fair media. I mean, that's all they can do is lie.
Well, that's
they
the
have
Democrats.
no policy.
They have nothing to,
Well,
nothing to go on.
They're Democrats,
Yeah.
okay? They have
Well,
no
Yeah. This is the argument on his part. And when it comes to Iran was defeated, just imagine what was the objective. We have never heard about the objectives of the war against Iran. He said that he wants to, destroy the Iranian capabilities to produce nuclear weapons. Tulsi Gabbard, who just resigned from his position in the United States, she said that there is no sign that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons. And they didn't change their policy toward nuclear weapons. This is the latest report on her part about the situation with Iranian nuclear. But they started, the objective of the Trump administration with the war against Iran was not the nuclear program of Iran. The nuclear program was on the table in the first round, before the first round of war that Israel attacked Iran. Then the second round of war that the United States together with Israel attacked Iran, they were negotiating on the nuclear program, that 400 kilogram of enriched uranium to downgrade or to downblend that 60% on Iranian soil, not outside of Iran. That was mentioned before this war started. So the problem, it wasn't about Iranian nuclear program. It wasn't about nuclear weapons of Iran. It was all about Donald Trump. He said that I want to choose the supreme leader of Iran. He did the same, by the way, in Venezuela. That's why he was so delusional. He thought that he's going to do the same with Iran. Iran is not Venezuela. Iran is not Iraq. Is not Afghanistan. Iran was an empire, for God's sake. The huge chunk of this planet was under the control of the Iranian Empire. This is a culture. This is a civilization, like the Russian civilization, like the Chinese civilization. You can attack one of those, countries who were part of the Soviet Union. You can destroy them, but you cannot destroy Russia, which was the heart of the Soviet Union. Because the Soviet Union was a huge chunk of land, but the brain was Russia. It was a civilization. And Iran, the Iranian empire was a huge empire, but the brain, the heart was Iran, what we know as Iran today. That's why you cannot go there. These people are proud of their history. These people know how to fight. How you can go and humiliate these people by, I'm going to choose who's going to be the supreme leader of Iran, who's going to be the president of Iran, and you're going to do whatever I told you to do. And you're going to send your oil and gas to me in the United States. I'm going to sell it on your behalf, and I'm going to receive the money, and maybe some fraction of that money going to get back to Iranian central bank, as they did. This is the same scenario in Iraq. For many years, they're doing the same in Iraq. They did to the Iraqi government. They're selling the oil of the Iraqi government, and the money gets back to the banks in New York. They were doing the same in Syria. They captured the region that producing oil in Syria, sending the oil and selling the oil to Israelis, and the money that gets back to the banks, some part of that money that Israel is paying the United States because of that oil, they're getting back again in the hand of Israelis. So they're basically selling the Syrian oil for nothing to Israel. And they're doing the same in Venezuela. I don't believe that. They didn't defeat Chavistas in Venezuela. they're going to get back. Sooner or later, you're going to see a huge turmoil, protests, riots in Venezuela against what's going on, because they would see nothing is happening in the society. They removed their president, the legitimate president of Venezuela. They attacked a country, and the president is in the United States. How ridiculous is that? Donald Trump wanted to dominate the global energy system. They know they cannot defeat China. They're not going to be able to defeat China militarily, economically, and geopolitically. China is winning on each and every aspect. They know that. The only way that you can bring China to its knees in the mind of those decision makers in the United States is to dominate the energy market or dominate the flow of oil all around the planet. So they started in Venezuela, coming to Iran. Just imagine if they could do something against Iran, if they could overthrow the Iranian government, what would that mean for China and for Russia? How it would be a huge loss for both of them and for the equilibrium of this planet. Because Iran, if the government in Iran is gone, the whole GCC countries is under the thumb of the United States. They have nothing to do. They have been sacrificing a lot. All these big, beautiful bases in their countries, they were paying everything with those bases. Soldiers, everything. They occupied their land and they were paying for everything. So when the war started, those same bases were the main reason that they got hit by Iranian missiles. Because the United States was using those bases against Iran, not to help GCC countries. So this is the reality of GCC countries today. Are they going to change their behavior? I don't think so. Because most of the money they have is in New York, is in the United States. That's why UAE running out of cash in 30 or 39 days of war. These are not real countries. These are all of them under the thumb of the United States. If they decide to do something in the Middle East, they say, just order. We're gonna follow you. But the problem is Iran. So Donald Trump, this was a huge gamble. If he could do something with Iran, it was a huge gain for the United States. Because you control the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, everybody knows what is the importance of the Strait of Hormuz. It's not about the oil and energy. It's about food, the most important thing on this planet. It's about fertilizers, helium, aluminum. Many things are getting out of the Strait of Hormuz. Just imagine those cables, internet cables that pass through the Strait of Hormuz. How important are they? So they had everything together. Oil, gas, Iran, South Caucasus would be gone. Russia went to fight in Georgia. One of the main reasons the fight in Georgia was the security reason, that the main reason they have with Ukraine. Just imagine something happening in the South Caucasus. They will destroy everything. Belt and Road initiatives, gone. North-South corridor, gone. And they have to come back to the United States. And the United States is going to be the king of this West Asia. They're going to run not only the West Asia, I would say the Central Asia. That's why you see the British government going to making deals with Armenia, Azerbaijan, these little countries who don't have any sort of importance when it comes to military, economy. They're not that big, that powerful. But they're trying to make some sort of alliance with these countries. They feel that they can manipulate the South Caucasus, which is the heart of the future of the Eurasian concept. Just imagine, with Iran not being in that picture, what would happen to Russia and China? What would happen to Iran as a culture, as a civilization? The United States attack Iran today. I don't know if you saw what the head of the Iranian parliament tweeted yesterday. In my opinion, this is the most important message of the Iranian government since this war started, since the revolution in 1979. Because the concept was always about, are we going to negotiate with the United States? Are we going to get something through negotiations? Are we going to do something with the United States? Let's talk about the nuclear program. Let's facilitate. Let's convince the United States you can invest in Iran. Let's make some sort of economic ties with the United States. By the way, these are the same delusional mindset. This is the same delusional mindset that is happening between Russia and the United States. Those people who are like Kirill Dmitriev and these people who think that the American problem can be solved. This hegemonic mindset can be solved by making deals or economic ties with the United States. No, they don't want Russia to be Russia. They don't want Russia to be power. Russia itself is the problem. Iran itself is the problem. Just get back, whoever, I don't know if you're familiar with the Wolfowitz doctrine. The Wolfowitz doctrine, there are two important points in that doctrine. Say no regional power and no superpower. No one can exist as a regional power or superpower. This is the very definition of what's going on right now against Iran and Russia. The problem is Iran is a country, a united, a country as powerful as Iran, a country as powerful as Russia. These are the problems. This is not the, it can come here and make some sort of economic, that would be beautiful. Tomorrow going to be more beautiful with the United States cooperation. These people are not there to cooperate with you. They're there to destroy you. They don't want you to be there. That's why the whole concept of creating Israel, just imagine, what is the meaning of Israel today? Who's supporting? This is the creation of the British Empire. Is the British Empire there anymore? No, there is no British Empire. This is the American Empire supporting Israel. Look at what has happened in Gaza. In the West Bank. In reality, they destroyed the West Bank. Look at the settlers. They're capturing is the proxy in the West Asia. The proxy to be used. The moment Iran is gone, they're gonna get all of these GCC countries. And none of them is capable of defending itself. Israel gonna hit each and every one of these countries. And UAE, Qatar, these are not, they don't have the army. They don't have the capabilities. They can capture all the West Asia if Iran is not there. This is the agenda. They don't want it. They don't want to have a greater Iran, a big Iran, a powerful Iran that's helped their economy. And people are concerned about the Strait of Hormuz. International law is under threat with this war, and people are dying. And yeah, everyone understands that. People are dying for such a long time. Just imagine how many these American sanctions have killed many people over the years. There's some sort of estimations of that. 26 million people were killed by these sanctions. What they did in Iraq. This is a Holocaust Holocaust. You can call it something else. But the sanctions are killing people. They were killing people. Look at the situation in Cuba. They're not satisfied with that, having that. The Trump administration is not satisfied. He wants everything. Everything in Cuba. He wants to run Cuba. This is the same people. Believe me, this is the slavery. This is you cannot make any sort of sense of this sort of behavior of the United States. This is the same. This is the modern phase of the colonialism and slavery. They want Venezuela to be their slave. They want Canada to be their slave. They want Greenland to be their slave. Mexico to be their slave. Everyone. Are they going to change it? No. And the problem is that they're facing right now something called Iran. And I'm sure they're going to fight to the last one. And they're prepared. They're more than prepared. They have a lot of surprises for the United States. A lot of surprises for the United States. It's not about the military bases in the Middle East. They can hit the military bases in Australia. The range of the missiles is not of problem, is not problematic for Iranians. Is not, the range is not anymore the problem with Iranian army, Iranian IRGC. They have designed, they have decided to limit the range of their missiles to 12,000 kilometers. They can hit targets in Australia, those bases that the United States is using, as far as Australia. When I say that, I mean how Iran would be able to hit the United States itself if they decide to go that far. It's not going to be a regional war. And they're prepared. Trust me, they're prepared for that. They're prepared for each and every step of escalation. They prepared to sacrifice their life to defend Iran, because Iran is so important for those people who are outside and who don't know anything about Iran, who are arguing the Iranian society is divided in Kurd, Turk, Lur, Baluchi, and Turkmen, and the people, Somali people, the northern people, southern people. That's not the reality. This is you go to Iran, you talk with the Iranian people, they feel Iran is in their blood. That's why they're willing. You remember General Kane, when they did that operation in southern part of Isfahan, he said, each and everybody who saw us in the sky, they were hitting at us with everything they had, with the rifle, with with any sort of arm they had. They were hitting us. This is the rural people. This is the reality of Iran today, and this is a history. Those people who are not familiar with Iran, if you want to know Iran, there is a poet, prominent poet, which is so much important. He somehow is a prophet for Iranian people. His name is Ferdowsi. He has a book about the war, how Iranians fight a war. The book is the book of Kings. They call it the book in English. They call it the book of Kings. But the name in Persian is called Shahnameh. One of the tragic, to understand the reality. And the guy who wrote this book, his name is Ferdowsi. He was a Shia Muslim. He was living during the Sassanid Empire. And it lasts 30 years to write this book. And one of the tragic moments in that book, I think, which is so important to understand the Iranian culture, is when it comes to the fight between the father and son. The hero of this book is someone called Rostam. Rostam is the hero, is the Superman of the Iranian army. And the enemy of Iran is Turan in this book called Turan. And when it comes, there is a tragedy happening in this book when Rostam, as the hero, is fighting his son, and he doesn't know the guy who's fighting against him is his son, because years ago he was married to the daughter of the Turan, to the daughter of the king of Turan, and he didn't know that Tahmine, that was his wife, was pregnant. When he left Turan, the enemy of Iran, and came back to Iran, he didn't know that his wife is pregnant, and he didn't see his wife. And when it comes to the battle between Iran and Turan, the two guys are fighting each other, both of them Iranians, by the way. Rostam as the Iranian hero against the guy from Turan, which is his son. When he's fighting, he's fighting his son. And the son has some sort of sign on his arm because he gave some sort of sign to the mother of his son that said, put it on his arm. I want to see that, because he didn't know. And that sign is on his son's arm, but he didn't perceive that. He was fighting with him. But there is some moment that he perceives that this is his son that is fighting him. But he kills his son in that fight. He not only kills his son, he kills himself by killing his son in that fight. Because what is more important for him is Iran, is not him and his son. And there is a statue in the city of Tus in Iran. The moment he kills his son for Iran, because what is important is Iran, is not him or his son. And what would happen to Iran? This is the sentiment of Iranian culture. This is the civilization. This is a culture that sacrifices everything to make his country greater and better. And you have seen that. I think you remember when the first round of war has happened, the head of Iranian Security Council called Ali Larijani. He was called before in June 2025, before Israeli attack on Iran. He said that someone in Israel called him. We know that many of Iranian Jews are living in Israel, and they speak perfect in Persian. They called him and said, you have to get out of your country or we're going to kill you. He said, come here. If you want to kill me, come here. I'm prepared for that. So this is the reality of Iran today. And he was assassinated in the second round of war, which started on February 28th. He and his son sacrificed their life. They knew what's at stake, and he was killed together with his son for Iran. This is the reality of many people may not understand it, but this is the country, this is a culture. The people, doesn't matter, they're gonna fight to the last moment. Ali Larijani and his son Murtaza are the new Rostam and Sohrab of Iran. They're going to be remembered like this. They sacrificed their life for Iran. And Donald Trump should know that these people going to fight. They're going to fight back. They're modern people. They're prepared. They know how to fight. They have the tradition. They have the weapon. They have the air defense system. They have improved drastically the air defense system. That's why you see the Iranian air defense system in Armenia. That's why you see the Iranian bombs on Su-30s of the Armenian army. This is Iran today. And they're going to send a lot of these weapons in the aftermath or during this war to others. That's why it shows how Iran is prepared. If they use nuclear weapons, which is the worst case scenario, I hope nobody never use these sort of weapons. But we know that the Israelis are unhinged. We had Jonathan Pollard yesterday. I had his interview. He's talking about nuking Iran. I have no problem. Let's go and nuke Iran. Let's manage that. If they do that, there would be no Israel. And those Ashkenazi Jews who got from Europe, the eastern part of Europe, to the region, they're gonna send them one way or other. They're gonna send them back to their homes. There would be no Israel anymore if they use nuclear weapon against Iran.
Coffee. Follow me.